Harold entered the house with a friendly smile, listened to concerns, provided an injection, and then left. A few hours later, the patient would die. No one imagined that this calm, tidy doctor wearing glasses was secretly waging a personal war against life. He appeared trustworthy, a caring figure, and a support for the elderly in a British suburb. However, he was actually the deadliest serial killer in British history, using his medical profession as a cover for the cold-blooded murder of hundreds of innocent people. Harold Frederick Shipman was born on January 14, 1946, in a working-class neighborhood of Nottingham. His family represented the typical post-war British household. His father was a truck dispatcher, and his mother was a homemaker. However, it was his mother, Vera Shipman, who greatly influenced his life. She was strict and intensely religious, and Harold was her favorite child, receiving much more attention than his siblings. This close relationship with his mother significantly shaped his personality, fostering his need for control and a sense of being special. When Harold turned 17, his mother became seriously ill with lung cancer. He watched her health decline day by day. Harold was by her side, helping out by bringing food, running errands, and holding her hand. He witnessed a once strong, commanding woman become a frail version of herself. One particular moment stayed with him, when the doctor gave his mother a morphine injection. Within minutes, she fell asleep, never woke up. That image stuck in Harold's mind. The doctor, with just one injection, ended her suffering, held complete control over her life. Harold began to associate medicine and morphine with a dangerous kind of power. Death of his mother marked a crucial change in Harold's life. The next year, he started medical school in Leeds. Although he was intelligent, hard-working, he was also shy and chose not to socialize much. His motivation for studying medicine was not driven by a love for biology or a desire to help others. Instead, he sought a profession where he could manage pain, death, and control over lives, a field where people would admire him, much like how his mother admired her doctor. In 1970, he graduated and obtained his medical license. He was young, polite, reserved, and highly disciplined. This was the Harold Shipman who appeared at clinics and hospitals. He wore glasses, maintained a neat appearance, spoke to patients in a calm yet confident manner. While many of his colleagues viewed him as unexciting but dependable, inside him, a troubling idea was developing, one that would eventually turn into a dangerous obsession. Early in his career, he worked at Pontefract General Infirmary and later at a hospital in Todmorden. It was at this location that his troubling behavior first appeared. He was discovered forging prescriptions for morphine, and with an unusually large supply of painkillers, much more than would be required for a large ward. As a result, he was arrested, confessed to his crimes, and received a suspended sentence. Despite this, he continued to practice medicine. The system allowed him a second chance, which he exploited to carry out a series of heinous acts in secret. After receiving a suspended sentence for forging prescriptions, Harold was eager to make a fresh start. In 1977, he relocated to Hyde, a small town in Greater Manchester, where he joined the Donnybrook medical practice. There, he began to shape himself into the ideal family doctor, one who patients could rely on for all aspects of their health, including pain management and end-of-life care. Patients adored Dr. Shipman. He was always polite, attentive, and respectful of their time. Elderly women in particular felt a strong connection to him. He listened carefully, didn't rush them, and never pressured them into unnecessary treatments. He made it a point to visit patients at their homes, especially those unable to travel to the clinic. These home visits became a hallmark of his practice. He would arrive, administer an injection, and then be on his way. Shortly after his visits, however, many of these patients would pass away. To the police and death registrars, he seemed like an ideal doctor. He completed death certificates himself, citing causes such as old age or heart failure, and frequently sent bodies to the crematorium without conducting autopsies. His reputation was so strong that no one doubted his records. If he declared a death to be natural, It was accepted without hesitation. People failed to notice that the death rate among his patients was significantly higher than that of his peers in the region. If they did notice, they attributed it to coincidence or characteristics of his patient group. He was punctual, detail-oriented, and excessively meticulous. He lived with his wife, Primrose, and their 4 children, following a rigid daily schedule similar to a military routine. Each night, he recorded new cases of death in his medical logs. There was no emotion involved. Everything was exact and clinical, resembling an accounting report. His method of killing was straightforward. He would visit elderly patients, primarily those living alone, and administer an intravenous injection. Most of the time, this involved a lethal dose of morphine or another potent opioid delivered quickly. The patient would lose consciousness and die within 15 minutes. Shipman would then calmly conclude his visit, leave the house, and fill out the necessary paperwork. Time of death, symptoms, no witnesses. Everything was meticulously managed. His actions lacked rage or chaos. They resembled a ritual. He didn't merely kill, he carefully orchestrated each event. He determined who would live and who would die. This might have been his warped way of dealing with his mother's death, possibly viewing himself as a savior from pain. Later, psychologists suggested that he felt a sense of godlike power from it. He took on the roles of judge and executioner. Over time, he became so confident that he stopped concealing his unusual actions. Sometimes, patients died one after another in the same day, all attended by the same doctor, with the same natural cause, and no one suspected anything. Starting in the late 1980s, the death rate among Harold Shipman's elderly patients began to increase, but no one recognized the serious pattern. The victims were primarily women, over 70, often widows who lived alone, but they were not always weak. Most were still vibrant and active. They died suddenly, without apparent suffering or signs of struggle. He was never rushed. He would visit a patient's home, administer an injection, wait a bit while observing their breathing slow, and only then would he look into their lifeless eyes, stand up, remove his gloves, adjust his tie, and leave. Relatives would learn of the death afterward, and when they received the medical report indicating a natural cause, there was no reason or legal basis to call for an investigation. Even in a well-designed system, problems can arise. In 1993, colleagues started to suspect that the number of deaths among patients under Shipman's care was unusually high, especially since he had seen many of them just hours before they died. An internal investigation was launched, but because Shipman was a meticulous doctor with all his paperwork in perfect order, and there was no national database to compare mortality rates between doctors at that time, the investigation was closed. Shipman realized he could act without fear of consequences and became more brazen. He not only killed patients, but also began forging their wills. In several cases, he either persuaded elderly women to change their wills in his favor or forged them himself. His aim was straightforward. He wanted their inheritances. In one instance, he misled a patient into thinking he was helping her with medical forms, while in reality, he gave her documents that transferred her property to him. By 1998, over 200 patients had died, yet the system remained oblivious. He was still seen as trustworthy. Bureaucracy failed to connect the evidence, and families found it hard to believe that their beloved doctor could be a monster. The situation changed dramatically after the death of Kathleen Grundy, 81, a vibrant widow who was engaged in her community. She was energetic and preparing for a trip with her daughter when she unexpectedly passed away at home. Just one day after Dr. Shipman's visit, what should have been a routine case turned into a serious error for him, leading to his ultimate downfall. On June 24, 1998, Kathleen unexpectedly passed away at home after a visit from her doctor, Harold Shipman. She had been feeling well, just returned from shopping, was planning a trip with her daughter, and was getting ready to celebrate her wedding anniversary. However, a few hours after the doctor's visit, she stopped responding to phone calls. Neighbors eventually discovered her body slumped in an armchair, holding a book. It appeared she had just fallen asleep. Harold Shipman wasted no time filling out her death certificate, attributing her death to old age and a heart condition. No autopsy was conducted because her family trusted the doctor, and the system relied on his professional judgment. Everything seemed ideal, except for one critical issue. Kathleen had a daughter named Angela Woodruff, who was skeptical of coincidences. Angela, being a lawyer, was familiar with how a properly drafted will should appear. When she received a copy of her mother's last will, she was shocked. The document stated that Kathleen left her entire estate, valued at over 300,000 British pounds, not to her daughter or grandchildren, but to Dr. Harold Shipman. Moreover, the will lacked a date, any witness signatures, and Kathleen's signature appeared strange, as if it had been copied. Angela was determined to get to the bottom of things. She first asked the notary if he had ever managed Kathleen's affairs. He answered that he had never created a will for him, and mentioned that he had an official copy of Kathleen's will, which had been prepared years prior. This original will clearly divided her estate among her family, directly contradicting the new will. Angela then approached the police, which marked the beginning of the unraveling of Harold Shipman's mistakes. He believed that no one would challenge him, that no detective would investigate further, and that he was beyond reach. However, the inspectors decided to open an investigation. The first issue noticed was that Kathleen's death certificate was filled out incorrectly. Next, there were inconsistencies in her medical records. While the doctor reported heart problems, her family insisted she had shown no symptoms. Additionally, the pharmacy where Shipman allegedly ordered her medications confirmed that there were no prescriptions under her name. This led the police to request an exhumation of her body. During the investigation, experts discovered high levels of diamorphine, a type of medical morphine usually prescribed for extreme pain in hospice patients, in Kathleen's tissues. However, she did not have any condition that would require such medication. The amount of morphine found was enough to be lethal for someone of her age and size. Experts determined that Kathleen Grundy's will was forged by comparing her signature on the new document to her signatures on older ones. They concluded she did not write it, and her computer showed no evidence of changes to the will. All signs indicated that Dr. Shipman had forged the document to steal money from a deceased woman. The combination of one deceased woman, her daughter, and the forged will revealed a dark and deadly chapter in British medical history. Following the alarming toxicology findings, the Manchester police recognized that this was not a one-time incident. They started to examine all the death certificates that Dr. Harold Shipman had signed over the years. As their investigation progressed, they became increasingly disturbed. They began to uncover a network of deaths connected to one individual, the esteemed Dr. Harold Shipman. The forensic team carefully examined the medical records of over 500 patients who had died after being treated by Dr. Shipman. They focused especially on elderly women who passed away at home and were cremated without autopsies. They paid close attention to cases where Dr. Shipman was the last person to see the patient alive, wrote the death certificate, and discouraged family members from requesting autopsies. These cases were quite common. To verify their suspicions, the police exhumed several bodies. In each case, tests found high levels of diamorphine and pure morphine at dangerously high doses. This was Shipman's method. He used this drug to make deaths appear natural. He could administer it during a home visit and later list the cause of death as a heart attack, respiratory failure, or general decline in health. Investigators were shocked by the extent of the situation. Almost every case appeared suspicious. In some areas where Shipman worked, more patients died in just a few years than in the entire rest of the city combined. None had reported a sudden decline in health before he arrived. Shipman specifically targeted patients who lived alone to eliminate witnesses. Another disturbing fact came to light. Harold Shipman kept killing until the day before his arrest. Even while the investigation was happening, he still visited patients, examined them, smiled, gave injections, and recorded deaths, despite the exhumation of Kathleen Grundy's body. As the case evolved, the police had to enlist more than a dozen forensic experts, toxicologists, criminologists, and psychologists to understand his motives, but nothing logical emerged. Shipman gained little from most of the murders, with only a few instances where he forged wills. Most of his victims left him nothing. Psychologists proposed that Shipman exhibited traits of both addiction and megalomania. He assumed the role of God, determining who should die and turning death into a routine act of murder. When the number of victims reached 215, the British media reacted with disbelief. It was shocking to discover that a well-respected family doctor, who was a father of 4 and had spent decades serving his community, turned out to be a cold-blooded serial killer. He may be the deadliest killer in British history, and possibly even in human history. The trial of Harold Shipman started on October 5, 1999, at Preston Crown Court, known for being one of the most secure buildings in England. The case attracted widespread media attention, with journalists from around the world covering the hearings daily, while families of the victims filled the courtroom. Sitting in the defendant's chair was an elderly man who appeared calm, with gray hair and a cold expression. He looked just like he did during his numerous visits to patients, composed, reserved, and confident. However, this time, he was not facing an elderly patient, but an entire nation. The prosecution charged him with 15 murder counts, supported by strong evidence, including exhumations, toxicology reports, forged wills, and inconsistencies in medical records. Yet, it was widely believed that this represented only a fraction of his crimes, with investigators estimating that the real number of victims exceeded 200. It was impossible to prove each murder with absolute certainty because many bodies had been cremated and there was insufficient evidence remaining. During the court proceedings, prosecutors listed the names of the women who had passed away in their sleep, found in various locations like next to a couch, in the kitchen, and in a rocking chair. The relatives of the victims were visibly upset and crying, while Shipman remained expressionless throughout the reading, showing no signs of remorse or emotion. A pivotal moment in the investigation was the case of Kathleen Grundy. Evidence was presented in court showing that her will had been forged, which included handwriting analysis and testimonies from her daughter, pharmacists, and neighbors. Another tragic incident involved 59-year-old Jean Lilly. Her grandson shared that, on the morning of her death, she was baking an apple pie for him. Just 2 hours later, the doctor called to inform him of her passing, claiming she had died peacefully of old age. However, tests later revealed that she had actually died from a morphine overdose administered by Shipman. He had contacted the funeral service himself and insisted on her immediate cremation. Psychiatrists involved in the case attempted to analyze his behavior. One described Shipman as a pathological narcissist who believed he was all-powerful. The defense attempted to question the exhumation methods and toxicology reports, but the evidence against Dr. Shipman was substantial. Numerous witnesses, including former colleagues, nurses, and victims' relatives, provided testimony. They all shared a consistent view. Dr. Shipman appeared to be perfect, and no one suspected that a monster was hidden behind his calm demeanor. On January 31, 2000, after 6 months of hearings, the jury found Harold Shipman guilty of all 15 murder charges and 1 count of forging a will. The judge sentenced him to 15 life sentences without the possibility of parole, a symbolic punishment since it was widely believed that he could have killed as many as more than 200 people. This verdict addressed not only Shipman, but also the system that allowed him to cause destruction for decades. The courtroom erupted in applause and tears. Even at the end of the trial, Harold remained upright and expressionless, almost as if the trial did not concern him. He did not apologize, provide explanations, or display any emotion. To many, he was seen not as a human being, but as a heartless machine of death. After the verdict, Harold Shipman was sent to Wakefield Prison, one of the UK's most secure facilities, known for housing the most dangerous criminals. He was monitored around the clock, but maintained the same demeanor in his cell as he had outside, withdrawn, silent, and detached. He avoided interactions, declined rehabilitation programs, refused to give interviews, and completely evaded questions about his crimes. He understood that he would be remembered in history. His name would forever be associated with a staggering number, 215-250, or perhaps even more figures that designated him as the deadliest serial killer in recorded history. He did not want his story to conclude on anyone else's terms. On January 13, 2004, the day before he turned 58, Harold Shipman was discovered dead in his cell. He had hanged himself using a bedsheet tied to the window bars. Unfortunately, no one was able to stop him. He exited life as he had taken it, quietly, without saying a word or providing any explanation. He left no suicide note, confession, or reasons. All that remained was silence.
Welcome back to our channel. Today, we'll be diving into a new case, the case of Alcácer girls. This story takes us to a small town called Alcácer, located in Valencia, Spain, with a population of only about 7 people. In the 1990s, it became the center of a horrific case involving 3 high school girls. On November 13, 1992, 4 friends, Antonia Rodriguez, Desiree Hernandez, Miriam Garcia, and another girl made plans to meet after school. Their day started like any other. They attended school and looked forward to spending the evening together. When Miriam arrived at school, she expected her father, Fernando Garcia, to pick her up after classes later. Fernando recalled driving her home in his car. During the ride, Miriam talked about her day, the grades she had received, and her dreams for the future. She was especially excited because she was planning to attend a party with her friends that evening. Fernando was sick with the flu, stayed in bed after bringing Miriam home. The party was scheduled to be held at a club called Cooler in the nearby town of Picassent. The girls planned to meet at the remaining friend's house at around 7 p.m. However, the friend wasn't feeling well and decided not to join them. The other 3 girls were determined to go ahead with their plans. By the time they were ready to leave, it was too late to rely on public transportation, so they couldn't find a bus to take them to the club. Miriam decided to call her father for help, but he was asleep instead. Her mother answered the phone. Miriam persistently asked her mother to have her father drive them to the neighboring town, but her mother refused. She believed it was a bad idea and potentially unsafe. And she also wanted her husband to rest. Miriam's mother insisted that the girls return home because it was already late. Miriam, however, asked if she could stay overnight at a friend's house, suspecting this was just an excuse. Her mother firmly insisted that Miriam come home. Reluctantly, Miriam agreed and promised to be back by curfew. Despite this, the girls were determined not to give up on their plans. They decided to find their own way to the club. At 8 p.m., the 3 friends began walking toward the club. For these young teenagers, this felt like an important night. It was their first time attending such a party. They had all promised their parents they would return on time. As the night went on, keeping that promise turned out to be much harder than they expected. Miriam was about 30 minutes late returning home, and her mother grew increasingly worried. Panic set in. However, in the early 1990s, the girls did not have cell phones, making contact with them impossible. The uncertainty was overwhelming for the parents. Miriam's mother tried to reassure herself, thinking that perhaps Miriam had been upset, gone to a friend's house, or was avoiding coming home to prevent an argument. Though this explanation felt overly optimistic, it gave her a brief sense of calm. She began calling the parents of all the friends Miriam had planned to meet that day. To her dismay, none of the girls were at home. The other parents were just as alarmed and immediately began searching for clues about where the girls might be. No one had any idea when or where the teenagers had disappeared. The last time Miriam's mother had spoken to her, Miriam was leaving a friend's house. It seemed unlikely that the girls could have gone far, as they had no money and had left all their belongings at home. The parents speculated that the girls might have gotten lost while trying to find transportation, Fernando decided to go to Picasso to look for his daughter. Though deeply worried, Miriam's father tried to reassure himself, believing that his daughter had always been a quiet, responsible girl who avoided trouble and bad influences. He hoped to find her near the club and bring her and her friends back home. Unfortunately, when he arrived, there was no sign of the missing girls. Witnesses at the club could not recall seeing anyone matching their descriptions. Fernando relayed this information to her mother, and the family quickly decided to contact the police. However, the police showed little urgency. They assumed the girls had simply stayed out late at the party, wandered into another club, had too much to drink, or spent the night with friends, and would likely return home soon. The authorities informed that they had to wait at least 24 hours before officially filing a missing persons report. The officers suggested that the teenagers might have a habit of sneaking out, but the parents firmly denied this. All the missing girls were between 14 and 15 years old. Miriam had left all her belongings in her room, clearly intending to return later that night. As she had promised her mother, similar patterns were observed in the other girls' cases. One of them had hastily packed a sports bag with items needed for practice the next day and had assured her parents she would come back early to rest. This behavior was entirely out of character for the girls, which left their families deeply concerned. Despite this, law enforcement remained resolute in their belief that no foul play was involved. Crime rates in the area were very low, making it difficult for anyone to believe the disappearances could be connected to criminal activity. When news of the case became public, everything changed. People in the small town, where most residents knew each other, were deeply shocked and assist in the search. Despite 24 hours passing without any progress from the police, the girls' whereabouts remained unknown. Volunteers formed groups to look for the girls and distributed leaflets with their descriptions. Throughout the town, Miriam's family was especially proactive. Working closely with the police and witnesses, the last person who saw the girls was their friend, who had fallen ill and stayed home instead of going to the party. She explained that the group had no access to transportation, no one to give them a ride, and no money. They had planned to hitchhike if necessary, an idea she strongly opposed. Considering it too dangerous, she tried to dissuade her friends, but feared they might go through with it anyway. Investigators questioned other young people who attended the party, but none of them remembered seeing the missing girls that night. This prompted the police to focus on the shortest route the girls would have taken to reach the party. A classmate of one of the girls stated that on Friday evening, as he was heading home after his final exams, he saw the girls in the city center. They were walking in the opposite direction of the club. When he asked if they were going to the party, they said no. He couldn't remember the exact time, but guessed they were likely heading to their friend's house. Another witness, an older acquaintance, reported seeing the girls a few blocks from their friend's house. He was driving through the area with his girlfriend when he noticed them, although he didn't know the girls well. He offered them a ride. Antonia, Miriam, and Desiree told him they were heading to the nightclub Cooler. Then his car broke down, so he dropped the girls off near an auto repair shop near the nightclub. From there, they likely continued on foot. The area where they were dropped off was near some fields. There were a few buildings around, so the area wasn't entirely deserted. Someone might have seen the girls, and there was hope of identifying another key witness. Shortly after, a witness came forward. A woman testified that she saw girls matching the description walking past her house. She mentioned noticing a white car with 3 or 4 men inside that stopped near the group. After briefly speaking with the driver, the girls got into the car. However, she couldn't remember the car's make or license plate. Her testimony raised several questions, considering the number of people already in the car. It wasn't clear how the girls could fit into a typical white sedan if there were already 4 occupants. The search effort reached a standstill, and it appeared the police's interest in the case was waning. Just a few days after the rescue operation started, the girls' parents began to fear the case would be abandoned entirely. Faced with this situation, Miriam's parents intensified their efforts to gather community support. They handed out flyers and spread the word through radio, television, and newspapers. By this time, Fernando had put in significantly more effort than law enforcement, however. His dedication sparked mixed reactions. Some accused him of seeking attention or fame amidst the turmoil of his daughter's disappearance. Despite this, he successfully brought national attention to the case and pressured the police to take more decisive action. A month and a half had passed since the girls disappeared, and for the three families from Alcácer, New Year's Eve was approaching, a holiday they would have to endure without their daughters. There had been no updates about the girls, and it seemed as though the police had completely stopped the investigation. The parents were trapped in an unimaginable state of anguish and uncertainty. On January 27, about 40 kilometers from where the girls lived, two beekeepers went to check on their hives in a remote, rugged area near La Romana. The location was difficult to reach unless someone was already familiar with it. While there, they noticed something unusual, a faint glimmer of light coming from the underbrush. As they approached, they found a patch of disturbed soil with something protruding from it. Upon closer inspection, they realized it was a hand emerging from the loose earth. The hand wore a wristwatch, which had reflected the sunlight and caught their attention. The police were immediately notified of the discovery. Later that day, during an excavation at the site, the bodies of the missing schoolgirls were discovered. All three were buried together in a shallow grave, bound with ropes, wrapped in a carpet, and covered with dirt. Shortly afterward, an investigation team was assembled, but its members were inexperienced and unfamiliar with handling such cases. This lack of expertise led to several critical mistakes. The burial site was neither photographed nor properly examined, and it wasn't secured until hours after the police arrived. As a result, crucial evidence may have been trampled, overlooked, or entirely lost. Afterward, authorities concentrated their search on the area surrounding the grave. Among the findings were personal belongings of the beekeepers and several small, isolated cabins. In one of these cabins, a piece of jewelry resembling an earring worn by one of the girls was discovered. Since the bodies were found on the beekeepers' property, their homes were searched thoroughly. Police suspected that these locations might contain items related to the victims. However, initial searches did not turn up anything. The medical examiner identified numerous signs of torture on the bodies of all three victims. The girls had suffered horrific deaths. Two of them, Antonia and Desiree, were found decapitated, while Miriam's body was missing her right hand, which was never recovered. Although bullet wounds were determined to be the cause of death, the bodies also showed multiple stab wounds and evidence of severe beatings. Some of the victims had teeth knocked out. It was clear they had been held captive for an extended period. Bound, subjected to starvation and dehydration, each girl endured brutal abuse and torture over several days, with some abuse continuing even after death. At the burial site, numerous DNA traces were discovered on the carpet, but the forensic technology of the early 1990s was too limited to fully analyze the evidence in and around the grave. Investigators found various unrelated items, fragments of clothing, rope, hairs, bone fragments, scraps of paper, and other debris. At the time of the discovery, Fernando was in London, working to raise international awareness about the girls' disappearance. He had planned a press conference the following day to continue the search for the missing schoolgirls. Despite everything, he remained hopeful that the girls might still be found alive. The news of their bodies being discovered was devastating. He immediately boarded the first flight home to be with his family during this tragic time. The extensive media coverage of these events had unintended and troubling consequences for those directly involved when the police informed the families about the girls' deaths. The moment was broadcast live on television. What should have been a private, painful moment was turned into a public spectacle, resembling reality TV. While search efforts were still ongoing, the police quickly identified potential suspects at the burial site. They found fragments of paper that turned out to be part of a patient record from a nearby hospital. This clue led them to a small house near the location where the girls' bodies were discovered. Inside the house, they found an earring, which became a key piece of evidence in the investigation. The suspect was Antonio, who had access to the house and a prior criminal record. However, the authorities could not apprehend Antonio, as he had disappeared, seemingly fleeing, which added to suspicions about his involvement. Forensic analysis determined that more than one person had attacked the girls. Investigators then turned their attention to Antonio's social circle, including his friend Miguel Ricard. Miguel was initially shocked to be under suspicion. Investigators noted that Miguel owned a white Opel Corsa car, and as mentioned earlier, a witness had stated she saw a white car stop next to the girls on the night of their disappearance. During his initial interrogation, Miguel stated that he hadn't seen Antonio in a long time, although they had been friends for years. Miguel said he didn't know Antonio's current whereabouts. He acknowledged that Antonio had psychological issues that could make him dangerous. Investigators suspected that Miguel's statements were an attempt to deflecting attention. Authorities accused Miguel of lying about his location during the girls' disappearance, suspecting he was trying to create a false alibi by claiming he was in prison at the time. Further investigation revealed that Miguel had only been jailed a few weeks after the murders. It remains unclear whether Miguel was genuinely mistaken or deliberately lying. Miguel grew up in a difficult household. His mother died when he was 3 years old, and he was raised by an abusive father. This upbringing led him to experiment with alcohol and banned substance. At 16, Miguel dropped out of school to support himself and began working. He spent some time working on a farm and later, at the age of 20, became a used car salesman. He lived with a girlfriend for several years, and when she became pregnant with their daughter, Miguel joined the Spanish army. After leaving the army, he returned home. At this time, he exhibited domestic violence, which put a strain on his relationship with his girlfriend. They eventually separated, and Miguel moved in with his close friend Antonio. Miguel and Antonio began committing crimes such as theft and stealing cars, which attracted police attention. Although Miguel had no history of violent behavior, Antonio's troubled past raised suspicions. Antonio was born in 1966 in Brazil to a large family that later moved to Spain from a young age. He exhibited a volatile and aggressive temperament, often causing trouble in school and instigating fights. His behavior worsened during his teenage years, as he frequently skipped school and was rumored to carry a weapon. Eventually, Antonio became involved in criminal activities, forming a gang that targeted vulnerable men. The gang would lure their victims to isolated locations under false pretenses, rob them, and blackmail them for extended periods. During this time, Antonio developed addictions to alcohol and banned substance, eventually he becoming involved in banned substance distribution. His sadistic and abusive behavior also extended to his own family, leading them to report him to the police. His mother even obtained a restraining order to protect herself from his aggression. Antonio was eventually convicted of crimes related to banned substance dealing and violence against, receiving a 9-year prison sentence at the time of the murders of 3 schoolgirls. Antonio was on weekend leave from prison due to good behavior. After the murders, Antonio fled. During multiple interrogations, detectives obtained a confession from Miguel, seemingly solving the case. However, Miguel later repeatedly denied the confession, claiming it had been made under pressure and coercion. The guilt of both Antonio and Miguel still needed to be definitively proven. This disagreement caused tensions even among the victims' families. Meanwhile, the case unfolded under intense media scrutiny, gradually becoming a pivotal moment in Spain's legal history. From the beginning, police actions raised serious questions and sparked controversy. Miguel's confession lacked consistency, with his testimony changing each time. Additionally, the detectives' records appeared fragmented, leading many of Miguel's supporters to believe that investigators had manipulated him to obtain the answers they wanted. According to the official prosecution narrative, Miguel and Antonio met on the specified date late that evening. They were driving a white car down a road when they encountered three schoolgirls walking toward a club. After stopping near the girls, the latter appeared to feel uneasy. Miguel confessed that Antonio instructed him to help seize the girls and forcefully drag them into the car. The two then drove to a secluded area where they assaulted and abused the victims. They decided to move to a more remote mountainous location near an apiary. There, in an isolated cabin, they continued to torture and abuse the girls for days. Miguel stated in his confession that he tried to persuade Antonio to stop, but claimed Antonio ignored him and coerced him into participating. Miguel asserted that he complied out of fear for his own life. The girls reportedly cried and begged for release, but Antonio struck one of them on the head with a rock to silence her. After a prolonged period of torture, the perpetrators murdered the girls. They wrapped the bodies in a carpet and buried them on the apiary grounds. Miguel later retracted his confessions after consulting a lawyer. When Fernando looked into these allegations, he discovered that many interrogations had been inadequately documented. Additionally, there were no audio or video recordings of Miguel's confessions, leaving investigators to rely solely on written reports. This raised suspicions that something was being hidden throughout the case. Miguel faced significant challenges, including going through 7 different defense attorneys, which caused major delays as the investigation and his detention lasted 4 years. Shortly before the trial, a new lawyer joined the case and had to review over 800 documents, including confessions and expert reports. During this time, advancements in forensic science enabled more detailed DNA analysis. Investigators had collected numerous samples of bodily fluids, hair, and blood during the investigation. However, they could not be fully analyzed with the forensic techniques available in the early 1990s. Now, updated methods made such investigation possible. Just 1 day before the trial, Fernando requested a delay to conduct additional analysis of this evidence. He contacted an independent forensic expert with experience in criminal cases. He quit his job and devoted his life entirely to the investigation, which took a heavy toll on his personal life. His marriage suffered greatly, and his wife later admitted that the tragedy had reduced their relationship to a mere shadow of what it once was. The tragedy also severely impacted Fernando's wife, whose health declined over the years. She battled cancer and ultimately refused a liver transplant, saying it should go to someone who truly wanted to live. By the time the trial began, she had passed away. The case of Alcácer girls undoubtedly became the most high-profile case in Spain's history. A heated confrontation unfolded as the prosecution's version of events was riddled with gaps and inconsistencies. Independent experts were unable to find any evidence linking Antonio or Miguel to the murders of the 3 schoolgirls. Their only connection to the case appeared to be a cabin near the area where the bodies were discovered and a torn map located close to the burial site. But outside the pit, searches of the apiary cabin and the white car allegedly used by the men revealed no traces of the girls' torture or blood. Considering Miguel's confession, it seemed highly improbable that no physical evidence of the crimes could be found in the house or vehicle. Despite such doubts, the prosecution remained determined to secure a conviction. Meanwhile, Fernando launched his own investigation and unearthed evidence suggesting the involvement of high-ranking officials. Driven by the painful loss of his daughter, he tirelessly sought the truth, openly criticizing the entire investigative process and sparking widespread public debate. He even appeared on television, alleging that the crime might be linked to a criminal network responsible for orchestrating such activities. He accused several prominent figures in Spain, a move that drew significant public attention. However, these allegations came with consequences. Both Fernando and a criminologist assisting him faced legal repercussions for attempting to obstruct the ongoing investigation. Miguel's trial began in mid-1997. By that time, he had already spent 4 years behind bars. He was expected to receive a severe sentence for the crimes he was accused of, despite the lack of concrete evidence. Miguel was convicted of kidnapping, abuse, and murdering the 3 victims, and sentenced to 170 years in prison. In 2010, Miguel appealed to the European Court, which ruled in his favor. Stating that the sentence constituted cruel punishment, the European Commission argued that indefinite prison terms could make inmates increasingly uncontrollable and violent toward other prisoners and staff. Miguel was later released in 2013, following a ruling by the Court of Justice of the European Union. As for Antonio, his whereabouts remain unknown. It was suspected that he had attempted to flee the country, although briefly detained in Ireland for traveling without a ticket. He disappeared shortly afterward. Some speculated that he allegedly jumped into the sea off the coast of Ireland to end life. Many believe he successfully escaped abroad, possibly returning to his native Brazil, as he held dual citizenship to this day. Antonio remains on fugitive lists as a prime suspect in the crimes committed against the 3 schoolgirls. The case's resolution and law enforcement's actions remain deeply controversial. Fernando continues to insist that the truth is far more complex than the prosecution has claimed. Samples taken from the carpet and the girl's hair couldn't be matched to any existing profiles in the database. The father believes that Antonio and Miguel likely didn't act alone. More people were likely involved in the crime. However, this truth may now never be revealed. Antonio, who could have helped uncover what really happened, was never found. A statue of the 3 girls was erected in the nearest cemetery where their bodies were buried. Just as in life, the girls remained together even after death. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Richard McCroskey. In September 2009, 4 people were attacked in their home. The bodies were there for days before the police arrived. The victims were Emma Niederbrock, 16, her friend Melanie Wells, 18, and Emma's parents, Mark Niederbrock, 50, and Deborah Kelly, 53. In today's video, we explore the complex chain of events that led to the deaths of these 4 individuals. Mark's family lived in Farmville, Virginia. He graduated from State College and worked as a graphic designer. Mark found his faith and chose to become a pastor, serving at the Hicksburg Church and earning respect in the community. His wife, Deborah, earned her doctorate and became an associate professor of sociology and criminology at Longwood University in Farmville on October 15, 1992. Mark and Deborah welcomed their daughter, Emma Niederbrock. Although she was initially a well-adjusted child, she eventually faced common emotional challenges during adolescence. When Emma was around 15, her parents decided to homeschool her, which led to intense feelings of isolation and frustration. This struggle pushed her into a long-lasting rebellious phase in early 2009, when her parents divorced. Emma's life became even more chaotic. Although they maintained a good relationship, the divorce took a toll on her. During this time, she discovered horrorcore music, which resonated with her through its lyrics for many fans. These lyrics expressed repressed anger and frustration, feeling isolated in her small town of Farmville. Emma found solace in online horror forums, where she met Melanie, an older girl from Virginia, who understood her struggles. Both girls had fathers who were Presbyterian ministers and bonded over their shared frustration with living in such a restrictive environment. Emma met a horror artist on the forums named Richard Samuel McCroskey. Born December 26, 1988, He lived with his sister and parents in Castro Valley, California. Those who knew Richard described him as quiet and somewhat submissive. He was bullied at school for his weight and red hair, which made him feel like an outsider. Richard enjoyed this isolation and developed unique interests that set him apart from his peers, notably. He had a strong dislike for music as a child. However, while at the dentist, his father played a CD by Insane Clown Posse, and Richard was instantly drawn to the band. He then borrowed his father's CD to make a copy, which sparked his passion for music. Richard became interested in horror music around the time he was struggling in school. He faced bullying and had trouble fitting into the traditional education system, which caused him to drop out of 2 high schools. It is important to note that Richard was very intelligent. He had a talent for graphic design and even dreamed of starting his own company. However, his passion for horror music eventually took a different direction. Soon after, Richard bought a cheap microphone and began recording his own music under the name Seco Sam. His lyrics described violent fantasies and the desire to harm others. He uploaded some of his songs to his MySpace page and became heavily involved in the horror music community. Other horror music artists accepted him, and despite the dark nature of his work, he still showed real talent in songwriting. After starting his YouTube channel in 2006, Richard uploaded a variety of content, including concert recordings and disturbing videos. In 2008, when he was 19, he began a relationship with 15-year-old Emma. They quickly bonded and began talking on the phone every day. Richard believed that Emma loved him and genuinely wanted to be with him. Despite the distance between them, they exchanged videos to learn more about each other, while his relationship with Emma blossomed. Richard faced some serious problems at home. His father kicked his mother out of the house in April 2009, which may have strengthened his relationship with Emma, whose parents had also split up just a few months earlier. Emma, Richard, and Melanie made plans to meet in September for a horror music festival called Strictly for the Wicked. Richard began going to Farmville, while Melanie flew in and stayed with Emma and Deborah. Deborah was initially nervous about letting an older guy stay with her daughter. However, seeing Emma happy for the first time since her divorce, she changed her mind. She agreed to let Richard stay, but insisted that she and Mark accompany the trio to the Horrorcore Music Festival. Emma posted on Richard's MySpace, expressing her love for him and her excitement at finally meeting him. Unfortunately, things did not go as Emma had expected. Richard acted immaturely, which disappointed Emma. However, since they had planned to attend the festival, she decided to be polite and go along. It was also a chance to see her favorite horrorcore bands. Even though Richard had disappointed her, she knew that she could still enjoy the festival with Melanie. Richard was probably excited to spend time with Emma, whom he considered his girlfriend. However, Emma had other intentions. Those close to her noted that she never referred to Richard as her boyfriend. They were just getting to know each other. Richard may have misinterpreted their relationship. Witnesses reported that Richard was upset when he saw Emma flirting with other guys. She deliberately avoided him, which may have further upset Richard. Tensions rose when Emma exchanged phone numbers with another guy. Richard then invaded her privacy by checking her messages and discovered that the guy had asked Emma to be his girlfriend. Although Richard was emotionally disturbed, no one around him noticed anything unusual. The group then returned to Farmville at approximately 2:43 a.m. Melanie posted on MySpace about the fun she had at the show, how much she missed her family, and that she would be returning home on the 16th. While she was posting, Richard was drinking, using illegal substances, and taking strong painkillers. At approximately 3 a.m. on September 14, Richard took a hammer from Emma's backyard and went upstairs. He entered Melanie's room and struck her on the head. Killing her instantly, he then entered Emma's mother, Deborah's room, and killed her as well. After that, he entered Emma's room. While it is unclear what happened next, it is possible that Richard watched her sleep and imagined the life he thought they could have together. He eventually attacked Emma, delivering fatal blows to her face after the murders. Richard was at a loss for what to do next in his chaotic mental state. He chose to record videos of himself in these recordings. He talked about the terrible acts he had committed, acknowledging that people would despise him for it. But he felt he had no choice because he had lost control in the videos. He expressed remorse for his actions and conveyed love for his family. On a darker note, Richard spent 3 days in the house with the people he had hurt. He did not shower, and it was unclear if he even ate or slept by September 16th. However, he could no longer hide from reality. Melanie's mother had been trying to contact her for days, knowing that Melanie would return on the 16th. She became worried when there was still no news and asked her husband to go to Farmville to check on her. He waited 8 hours outside Deborah's house. He kept knocking and calling, but no one answered. So he went home. The next day, Melanie's mother called Deborah's house phone. Richard answered and informed Melanie's mother that the girls were visiting Emma's father, which prompted her to contact Mark. Mark said that Emma and Melanie were not with him and that he had not heard from them for several days. Realizing that something was wrong, Mark went to his ex-wife Deborah's house, where Richard was staying, around 5 p.m. when Mark entered the house. Richard immediately attacked him after killing Mark. Richard dragged his and Melanie's bodies into Emma's room. Melanie's mother became increasingly concerned when Mark stopped answering her phone calls. She called Richard again, and this time he insisted that he did not know where the girls were. He mentioned hearing strange noises coming from the basement. Melanie's mother instructed him to call 911, which he did. When Richard called 911, he stated that he had heard a noise in the basement and was too scared to investigate. He asked the police to come and help him check what the noise in the basement was. He also informed them that the house was not his. He was at his girlfriend's house when the police arrived to assist him. They noticed a foul odor, however. The police did not find any reason to investigate further. They felt satisfied with the explanation Richard provided and left the crime scene. Strangely, the police did not notice the dried blood on Richard. When the police left, he escaped. He found Mark's car keys and drove away. Meanwhile, Melanie's mother repeatedly called the police, urging them to take action regarding her missing daughter, forcing the police to return to the crime scene once more. By this time, Richard was gone. The front door was unlocked, and when the police entered, they smelled a foul odor. They searched the house and discovered 4 bodies, prompting them to launch an investigation into the events that had occurred while trying to get to the airport. Richard, an inexperienced driver, caused a car accident. He was arrested by the police that night, however, because he had not yet been identified as a murder suspect. He was only charged with driving without a license, a misdemeanor. This allowed him to leave as long as he promised to attend court. A tow truck driver came to tow the car and asked Richard if he wanted a ride, which he accepted. Requesting to be dropped off at a nearby gas station during the trip, the tow truck driver noticed a strong, foul odor coming from Richard, describing it as the worst odor he had ever encountered. Upon arriving at the gas station, Richard was captured on surveillance footage, purchasing several items. He then went to the airport to purchase a ticket home. Unfortunately for him, he did not have enough money for his next flight, so he had to wait until the next morning with nowhere else to go. He fell asleep in the waiting area. Eventually, the police identified Richard as a suspect and issued an arrest warrant for him by any means necessary. Airport security captured video footage of him, and a security guard alerted the police to his location. Resulting in Richard's arrest, the police initially tried to link him to 2 other murders in the area and charged him with 6 counts of premeditated murder. 2 of those charges were later dropped. But Richard Samuel McCroskey still faced the death penalty on the remaining 4. He eventually pleaded guilty in hopes of receiving a lighter sentence from the judge and was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Richard is currently incarcerated at Wallens Ridge State Prison in Big Stone Gap, Virginia. There are reports that other inmates dislike Richard and often bully him. Although these claims have not been verified, Melanie's parents may find comfort in knowing that he is no longer capable of harming anyone. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Michelle Linehan. In 1994, Michelle Linehan, then known as Michelle Hughes, left Louisiana and moved to New York to work for a modeling agency. However, her stay in New York did not last long, and Michelle quickly changed her career path. When she moved to Alaska, she began working as a stripper at the Great Alaskan Bush Company, which not only brought in a substantial income, but also helped her attract the attention of many men who wanted to marry her here. Michelle continued this work for several months until she met Kent Leppink. Kent appeared modest and reserved, but Michelle's parents described him as impulsive and prone to losing control. Like Michelle, Kent was also trying to start over. After being caught stealing money from his family's business in Michigan, he fled to Alaska. Seeing it as the perfect place to leave his troubles behind, Kent believed meeting Michelle was fate. The two began dating immediately, and within a month, Kent proposed. However, Michelle wasn't in a hurry to give him an answer. When Kent introduced Michelle to his parents, they immediately noticed that she seemed distant toward him. When he hugged her, she instinctively pulled away, making it clear that Michelle didn't truly love Kent. His mother began to suspect that Michelle had been seeing other men, and what Kent's mother felt was right. When traveling salesman Scott Hilka met Michelle at the club in late 1994, he too fell in love with her. They quickly developed a deep relationship. Then, in the summer of 1995, a widower named John Carlin entered the picture. John, a single father who had recently lost his wife to cancer, although soon discovered Michelle's other relationships. He had already fallen in love with her and also proposed. Remarkably, both Kent and John, the 2 men, were aware of each other for several months. John, Kent, and Michelle even lived in the same house in Anchorage. This wasn't just a love triangle, it was a complex web of relationships. People at the strip club where Michelle worked believed she was simply skilled at manipulating others. She took full advantage of her relationships, receiving money, lavish gifts, and financial support from her admirers. Other dancers didn't find the gifts unusual, as club patrons often gave such presents to gain the women's attention. However, no one truly believed Michelle intended to marry any of these men. All of them were at least 10 years older than her, but she had a way of charming each one. She skillfully played her game, knowing exactly how to manipulate and control the men in her life. Michelle insisted that she never asked for more than what they were willing and able to give. Meanwhile, Kent remained hopeful and genuinely believed he was preparing for a wedding with Michelle. In preparation for this momentous occasion, Kent's father planned to travel to Anchorage in the spring of 1996 to meet his future daughter-in-law. However, shortly before his arrival, she suddenly disappeared. When Kent's father reached Anchorage, he found his son in a state of grief. After a brief visit, he returned to Michigan without fulfilling his purpose. On May 2, 1996, Kent's body was discovered along a deserted road. 80 miles south of Anchorage, he had been attacked 3 times, in the back, chest, and head. His body was found by accident when electricians working nearby noticed his bright red jacket. That same day, a letter arrived at his parents' home. The letter contained instructions that it should only be opened in the event of his death. When his parents received the letter, they immediately tried to contact him, but were unable to reach him. The exact time of Kent's death could not be determined, but forensic experts estimated that he had died 1 or 2 days before his body was discovered. Shell casings were found near the body, but the murder weapon was missing. When the Leppink family learned of the tragedy, Kent's mother immediately remembered the letter her son had left behind, still sealed as he had instructed. At the same time, investigators at the crime scene were unaware that critical evidence was not there, but was instead in the possession of Kent's parents. The letter said that if he died under suspicious circumstances, John, Michelle, or Scott Hilka could be held responsible. He also requested one more thing, which was to ensure that Michelle would spend a long time in prison. Kent clearly suspected Michelle and one of her lovers of plotting to kill him. His parents immediately contacted the police and handed over the letter he had written. When detectives opened the envelope, they quickly realized that this case would be anything but straightforward. The letter provided critical clues and leads, prompting them to thoroughly investigate everyone involved in the love triangle. Scott said he was surprised to learn he was being investigated. As he was not in Alaska at the time of the murder, investigators reviewed all airline and phone records and determined that Scott was not in Alaska, so he was cleared of any involvement in Kent's death. The following day, detectives questioned a woman, Kent's close friend. At the police station, she broke down in tears upon learning that Kent had been violently killed. During her questioning, she revealed that Kent owned a weapon and mentioned a significant detail. Kent had a $1 million life insurance policy, with Michelle listed as the beneficiary. This could be Michelle's motive for harming Kent. However, investigators discovered that just days before his death, Kent had removed Michelle as the beneficiary. Meanwhile, Michelle was unaware and still had a motive for the murder. A few days after Kent's body was found, police searched his car and discovered another envelope in the glove compartment. This letter seemed to be a correspondence between Michelle and John Carlin. In it, they discussed how John had supposedly bought a cabin at Lake Tahoe and invited Michelle to spend the weekend there. However, detectives uncovered that John hadn't actually purchased any property. It was a lie. The whole situation seemed staged, as if John and Michelle were exchanging messages designed for Kent to find. The letter appeared intended to provoke Kent's jealousy and prompt him to travel to the lake, near where Kent's body was found. But why would they do this? Was it a trap to lure Kent? According to the police, the plan seemed to have worked. Kent had apparently become jealous, and it all ended with 3 weapon wounds. The problem was that this was all based on speculation, no concrete evidence, no witnesses, and not even the murder weapon. A few months into the investigation, the lead investigators were reassigned to another precinct, causing the case to lose momentum and eventually come to a complete halt despite several pieces of circumstantial evidence. No charges were ever filed. At the time, Hilka was living in California. Carlin and Michelle each left shortly after the murders. Michelle settled in Olympia, Washington, seemingly starting a new life and leaving her past behind. After moving to Olympia, Michelle began attending college, pursuing studies in biology and psychology. She later earned a master's degree in public administration. In 1998, she married a young doctor named Colin Linehan in New Orleans, and they welcomed a daughter a year later. In 2004, a new cold case unit was formed in Alaska to reopen unsolved cases. The 8-year-old crime quickly became a priority. As evidence strongly pointed toward Michelle and John, Michelle became the main suspect in planning the murder, while John was believed to be the one who pulled the trigger for 8 years. The case remained inactive until new detectives showed up at Michelle's suburban home. They asked her to clarify some statements she had made following the murder. By then, Michelle was no longer working as a stripper. She admitted that she had only viewed the job as a temporary way to make money and had left it behind as soon as she could. Colin, a successful physician, was just as shocked as Michelle when the police arrived at their door. By that time, they had been together for 6 years and were living a stable, fulfilling life that seemed to embody the American dream. However, this perfect image was now in jeopardy in Olympia. Michelle's friends were stunned to learn that behind her image as a perfect mother, churchgoer, parent-teacher committee member, businesswoman, and devoted wife, there was a tumultuous past. Authorities began preparing to seize several personal computers used by Michelle, although much of the data on the computers had been deleted. Investigators managed to recover a significant portion. Among the restored files were emails and correspondence between Michelle, Kent, John, and Scott Hilka. It became clear that Michelle had captivated the hearts of all 3 men, telling each one he was the most important person in her life while dismissing the others as mere toys to cover her expenses. These revelations exposed the manipulative dynamics of their relationships, but did not provide enough solid evidence to charge her with murder. There were, however, incriminating findings in the case. Investigators focused on a letter sent the day before the murder, which discussed Seychelles, a country offering citizenship for a substantial fee. The key detail in the letter was Michelle's question about whether Seychelles had an extradition agreement with the U.S. and if it would extradite criminals. However, this alone was not enough to press charges, adding to the complexity. The murder weapon was identified as a .44 caliber Desert Eagle, a distinctive weapon initially. John denied ever owning such a weapon. However, a surprising witness came forward, John's son, who was a child at the time of the crime but had grown into an adult by 2005. He decided to assist in the investigation of this decades-old case, which he had partially witnessed. The son revealed that shortly before the murder, his father had purchased a weapon after seeing a newspaper ad. He claimed to have seen the weapon the day after Kent was killed. It was in the bathroom sink, being cleaned with some kind of chemical, and his father appeared to be handling it carefully. The son could not identify the weapon's model or describe its appearance in this tangled love triangle orchestrated by the dancer. It seemed possible that John had been the one to acquire the weapon from the beginning of the investigation. Michelle insisted that she was cooperating with law enforcement and denied any involvement in Kent's death. By the fall of 2006, investigators believed they had gathered enough evidence to charge both Michelle and John Carlin with first-degree murder. Michelle was able to post bail immediately and return to her family in Washington while awaiting trial. Although she was required to wear an ankle monitor and adhere to strict restrictions, John, however, was denied bail and spent 6 months in custody before the trial, maintaining his innocence throughout. In court, the prosecutors portrayed Michelle as a cunning manipulator who sought to profit from the romantic entanglements she had created. Michelle's attorneys argued that the case against her was based entirely on circumstantial evidence, giving them hope for a favorable verdict. John's legal team, on the other hand, shifted suspicion to others, even accusing John's own son, who had testified against him. They claimed Michelle was the true mastermind behind the murder, a manipulative seductress who orchestrated the crime, possibly by court, convincing someone else to carry it out. The defense proposed several theories, including the claim that Michelle herself had killed Kent, one of her lovers. To collect a $1 million insurance payout, the prosecution argued that John had spent a large amount of money on Michelle, whom he deeply loved, when one of her other lovers pulled away. They claimed the only obstacle between John and his happiness with Michelle was Kent. Prosecutors alleged that John and Michelle had crafted a plan involving a fake letter to lure Kent to the location where he was murdered. Asserting that this letter had set the crime into motion, John contended that the letter was merely a joke created by Michelle to make Kent jealous and end their relationship. The prosecution went on to present Michelle's exchanges with her lovers, including one between her and John, who stated that he would do anything for her, even risk his life, to the prosecution. This suggested that her lovers might have been willing to commit murder for her. They also highlighted emails referencing the Seychelles and escaping justice, which they argued reinforced their case. The defense countered that, aside from circumstantial evidence, most of the emails were vague and open to multiple interpretations. After 4 days of deliberation, the jury found John Carlin guilty of first-degree murder. John was sentenced to 99 years in prison when Michelle's trial began. She claimed that she never considered Kent her fiancé, as she had repeatedly turned down his marriage proposals and had agreed only to marry Scott. However, Scott and Michelle's relationship fell apart before the crime occurred. The defense argued that Kent had significant personal issues. Claiming he had become a nuisance to Michelle, they alleged that he stalked her, monitored her every move, gathered information about her bank accounts and phone records, knew her social security number, and even read her emails. Over time, Michelle reportedly realized he was stalking her and began to fear him. She supported these claims, which angered Kent's parents, who accused her of distorting the story. Michelle's defenders also described Kent as an unusual individual who had been struggling with mental health problems. They attributed the disturbing letters he sent home to his mental state at the time. The defense attempted to clarify Kent's misconceptions regarding his relationship with Michelle. He was fully preparing for a wedding despite her refusal. In the end, it was supposedly too difficult for him to acknowledge that he had been so mistaken, and thus, revenge seemed like a viable option to him. However, the defense argued that this did not make Michelle a bad person, let alone a murderer. They also raised concerns about the email exchanges, contending that it was inappropriate to edit or delete portions of the messages to leave only incriminating statements. The defense further disputed the assertion that Michelle had committed the crime or that she was the mastermind behind it. Under Alaska law, if it could be proven that Michelle was involved in planning the murder, her actions would legally be considered equivalent to pulling the trigger. Even the attorneys expressed concerns that Michelle's past might prevent the jury from recognizing her as the educated wife and mother she had become. Surprisingly, a former dancer who had worked with Michelle at a club testified for the prosecution. This witness kept a detailed diary in which she noted the favorite films of her friends and acquaintances. She claimed that Michelle was particularly obsessed with the 1994 film, The Last Seduction, a story that paralleled Kent's case. In the movie, the female protagonist manipulates her lover into killing her husband to collect insurance money. The witness asserted that Michelle often referred to this film as her favorite, admired the lead character, and aspired to be like her. The defense disputed the testimony, stating that Michelle did not have access to a weapon matching the one used in the crime. Additionally, the defense argued that Michelle had taken steps to remove herself from Kent's insurance policy shortly before the murder. The prosecution countered this claim, arguing that Michelle was not canceling her involvement, but merely clarifying beneficiary details. However, Kent had already changed the beneficiaries before his death, leaving Michelle with nothing. During the hearings, Michelle remained calm and chose not to testify before the jury, consistently asserting her innocence and claiming she had nothing to hide. The defense presented her husband, Colin, as a key witness to challenge the claim that Michelle could be a murderer or the mastermind behind the crime. Colin played a crucial role in defending Michelle's character, which the prosecution had tried to tarnish. He shared that, although he was aware of Michelle's past work as a stripper, he admired her determination to take that job to pay for college and create a better future for herself. The defense argued that the prosecution's case against Michelle relied entirely on circumstantial evidence and lacked any concrete proof. The trial lasted 5 weeks, followed by 2 days of jury deliberation. On October 22, 2007, Michelle was convicted of first-degree murder. The verdict was devastating for Michelle. Her fiancé Colin and their daughter, Kent's relatives, feel relieved and partially fulfill Kent's last wish before he was killed. Michelle's attorney, however, was determined to keep fighting. The defense team filed an appeal, focusing on the missing murder weapon and the questionable evidence used to convict her. The rare weapon, believed to have been used to kill Kent, could potentially exonerate her, but it had not been found even more than a decade after the crime. After John Carlin began serving his sentence, he reportedly admitted to owning a weapon matching the description, a Desert Eagle of the same caliber as the murder weapon. John claimed he had lied earlier out of fear, believing he was being hunted and would be jailed based on his testimony. According to him, his weapon went missing shortly before the crime, but later reappeared. He explained that he had been forced to clean it with a chemical solution to remove fingerprints and then disposed of it by throwing it into a garbage container. All the while, John continues to insist that he did not kill Kent. After the hearings, Michelle was sent to a women's prison in Alaska, where she awaited sentencing. She was eventually sentenced to 99 years in prison. During this time, Michelle's husband frequently traveled to Alaska to visit her, striving to support both her and their family. 2 years later, Michelle's attorney successfully overturned her first-degree murder conviction. A significant development arose when John Carlin, who had been beaten to death in a lodge prison fight in 2008, while his appeal was still pending, became central to the case. Since Michelle's conviction had been primarily based on John's testimony, the court dismissed the case following his death. This marked a turning point in Michelle's favor. On February 5, 2010, the Alaska Court of Appeals overturned Michelle's conviction. While awaiting a retrial, Michelle was released on $250 bail. During the retrial, the prosecution was prohibited from referencing her previous conviction, the movie, or the victim's letters, as these were deemed speculative. As a result, the case against Michelle began to look much weaker. Kent's parents attended the hearings and were shocked to learn of Michelle's release. On December 13, 2011, Anchorage Superior Court Judge Philip Volland dismissed the murder charge against Michelle. Due to the prosecution's inability to prove her guilt, Michelle resumed her life in Washington, where she now runs a laser surgery clinic after John Carlin's death in prison. His son filed a lawsuit against the state of Alaska and received $160 in compensation for his father's death. Kent's father passed away in 2014, but Kent's mother continues to visit Alaska. She considers it the only place where she feels close to her son and remains committed to seeking justice. Each visit, however, reminds her of the guilt she feels for being unable to fulfill Kent's final wish, as described in his letters. In the end, no one was ever held accountable for Kent's murder. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Barbara Kendhammer. Todd Kendhammer and Barbara met when they were both 16. Todd confessed it was love at first sight. They became close friends and eventually started dating in 1989. 2 years later, they got married and began their life together in Wisconsin. They soon welcomed their daughter, Jessica, followed by their son, Jordan. Jessica shared that her mother often called her father a wild rabbit because he was always full of energy and constantly coming up with new and crazy ideas. Barbara wholeheartedly supported Todd in everything he did. They had a loving relationship and rarely argued. Barbara worked at the middle school cafeteria, while Todd was employed at a factory producing aluminum cans. Together, they took on side projects, buying and selling houses, while Todd also did glass repair work, fixing broken windows and car windshields. The family lived a comfortable life. In 2016, Todd and Barbara celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. And that same year, they became grandparents for the first time when their older daughter had a baby. However, 2016 would mark a dramatic turning point in their lives. On the morning of September 16, 2016, Todd and Barbara woke up early and got ready for work. Todd was driving Barbara to her job at the school cafeteria. Later that day, they planned to meet their children for dinner at a restaurant. Their son, Jordan, who lived with them while attending college, remembered hearing the garage door open as his parents left. He mentioned there were no disagreements or anything unusual between them that morning. At 7:45 a.m., Todd and Barbara stopped briefly at a neighbor's house, as they were keeping an eye on the home while the neighbor was away. After a few minutes, they got back into the car, but instead of heading toward Barbara's workplace, they drove in the opposite direction while traveling down a rural road. Tragedy struck at 8:05 a.m. Todd made an urgent call to emergency services, reporting that he and Barbara had been involved in a severe car accident on a countryside road near La Crosse, Wisconsin. According to Todd, a metal pipe had smashed through the car's windshield, striking Barbara, who was in the passenger seat. She suffered serious injuries to her head and neck when the police arrived at the scene. Todd explained that at first, he thought he saw a bird. However, at the last moment, he realized it was actually a metal pipe. According to Todd, the pipe had fallen from a passing truck and struck Barbara directly. The pipe, which caused fatal injuries, was approximately 135 meters long and weighed about 10 kilograms. Barbara was unconscious but still breathing and was rushed to the hospital. Todd, panicked and trembling, was covered in his wife's blood and overwhelmed with distress over her condition. At the hospital, neurosurgeons informed Todd that Barbara's condition was critical and her chances of survival were very low. Less than 24 hours later, in the early hours of September 17, Barbara Kenhammer passed away without. Her family decided to donate her organs to help other patients in need. However, the tragedy didn't end there. Police began to suspect that Todd might have been responsible for his wife's death. Investigators observed abrasions on Todd's hands and knuckles, along with scratches on his neck. They found inconsistencies in Todd's version of events. Police searched for the truck Todd claimed the pipe had fallen from and interviewed locals to determine if anyone had seen such a vehicle that day. They also reviewed security footage from cameras near the accident site. One camera captured Todd's car driving along the road at approximately 7:57 a.m., but no truck matching Todd's description was seen traveling in the opposite direction during that time frame. 4 days after the incident, a medical examiner performed an autopsy on Barbara's body. The autopsy revealed 3 lacerations on the back of her head. It was determined that Barbara died from blunt force trauma to the head and neck, which caused skull fractures, a fracture of the cricoid cartilage, and fatal brain damage. The cricoid cartilage, located at the base of the neck, can be fractured during strangulation. Barbara also had multiple scratches on her neck, a broken nose, a laceration on her forehead, and bruises across her body. Photos taken by police at the scene showed abrasions on Todd's hands and scratches on his neck and chest. Todd explained these injuries by claiming he got them while working with glass, as he often repaired broken windshields. However, a local construction worker who passed by the Kenhammer's car around 8 a.m. reported seeing no damage to the windshield or anyone near the vehicle. The car was parked on the roadside but appeared empty. Police theorized that Barbara might have tried to escape from her husband and hidden in the tall grass, with Todd pursuing her. On the morning of the incident, Barbara was scheduled to be at work by 8 a.m., but she never called her co-workers to inform them of any delays. She also failed to call her mother, a daily routine she followed every morning before going to work. Todd told investigators that he planned to craft a windshield for Justin Heim, a former co-worker. He claimed that, while driving Barbara to work, he decided to stop by Justin's house to deliver the windshield. When questioned, Todd was asked by police if he had called Justin before going to his house. Todd admitted he hadn't called, explaining that he was confident Justin would be home. However, when investigators spoke to Justin, they received a completely different account. Justin stated that he had never ordered a windshield from Todd. Further investigation revealed that Todd didn't even know where Justin lived. About a week after Barbara's death, the police asked Todd to come to the station, claiming they had developed leads about the trucks the pipe might have fallen from that day. Todd went to the station, but appeared confused during questioning. Frequently forgetting details, he explained that he was on sedatives, but hadn't taken them that day, which left him feeling overly anxious as the interrogation continued. Investigators began to suspect Todd was lying. Additionally, the medical examiner concluded that Barbara's death could not have been caused by a pipe collision. When pressed further by police about his actual destination that day, Todd changed his story. He claimed he had been heading to another friend's house instead of Justin's. Police later located this friend, who also confirmed that he had never requested a windshield or discussed it with Todd. After 3.5 hours of questioning, Todd was released. However, 3 months after Barbara's death, Todd was arrested in December 2017. Todd went to trial for Barbara's death, with most attendees showing their support for him. His daughter, Jessica, was convinced her father couldn't be responsible for her mother's death, but worried that the court might impose a severe sentence. Forensic expert Dr. Kathleen McCubbin testified that Barbara died from head and neck trauma caused by a blunt object. Todd's lawyer questioned this. Pointing to a large travel mug found on the car's passenger side floor, he suggested that the mug might have struck Barbara's face as she ducked to avoid the pipe, potentially causing her injuries. The condition of the car's windshield also became a key focus of the trial. Alongside the medical evidence, defense expert Mark Meshulam, who had over 30 years of experience in glass-related cases, supported Todd's account. He testified that the windshield exhibited 3 points of impact: one from Todd's fist hitting the glass, another from the pipe entering the windshield, and a third from Todd pulling the pipe out. However, police forensic experts disagreed, concluding that the windshield only displayed 2 external impacts, ruling out the possibility of the pipe hitting it twice. Jessica and Jordan strongly defended their father during the trial. They couldn't believe he would kill their mother and then call the police just 5 minutes later. Jordan argued that, had their father intended to harm Barbara, he wouldn't have staged a complicated pipe incident on a busy road, especially since he owned around 28 weapons stored in the basement on the witness stand. Todd insisted he had never physically harmed Barbara. He explained that he panicked during police questioning and gave inconsistent statements. He said, "When I watch the video, I see myself in it. But the person speaking doesn't feel like me. I wasn't in the right state of mind. I wasn't thinking about my actions or where I was going. My mind was only focused on Barbara." Todd Kendhammer was convicted of first-degree murder on December 15, 2017. During this hearing, Jessica and Jordan were stunned when Barbara's cousin spoke in court against Todd. The cousin read a letter signed by other family members, expressing their collective desire to protect Barbara and urging the court to impose the harshest punishment on Todd. Jessica disclosed that her mother and this cousin had a strained relationship and had stopped speaking to each other before her mother's death. Following the trial, Todd was forced to sell the house he and Barbara had lived in to cover legal expenses. In the end, the judge ruled that Todd was sentenced to life in prison and is eligible for parole after 30 years. Despite the initial ruling, Jessica and Jordan refused to give up and were determined to clear their father. In August 2021, 4 years after his conviction, Todd returned to court once again. He insisted on his innocence, claiming that Barbara's death was caused by a pipe accident. While the prosecution maintained that he had murdered her, Todd's attorney introduced a pathologist with experience in nearly 6 autopsies. After reviewing Barbara's medical records and photographs, doctor found no evidence of a struggle, Contradicting the original forensic expert's conclusions, she theorized that Barbara's cricoid cartilage injuries might have been caused by a blow from a large travel mug resting on her lap during the car ride. Regarding the wounds on the back of Barbara's head, doctors suggested that Barbara may have instinctively ducked in fear, causing the pipe to strike her. She concluded that Barbara's death was the result of a car accident. The defense also called forensic pathologist Dr. Kathleen. She described the case as complex and acknowledged that the original autopsy had been well executed. With reasonable conclusions, however, she explained that she would not have reached the same conclusions, agreeing with another pathologist for the defense. Dr. Kathleen stated that she did not believe Barbara was strangled. She added that in her extensive experience, she had never encountered a fractured cricoid cartilage in any strangulation case. To better understand what happened in the fatal incident, local authorities recreated Todd's account by conducting an experiment. They dropped a similar pipe from a truck bed to see if it could hit a car's windshield. Initially, Todd's attorneys dismissed the test as inconclusive, and the video of the experiment, conducted in 2017, was not introduced until 2021. The experiment showed that if a pipe bounced a certain way, as Todd described, it could hit the windshield in one of 4 attempts. The pipe hit the ground and bounced high enough to reach the windshield. Lending credibility to Todd's version of events, the attorneys also presented additional videos of similar accidents to demonstrate that Todd's case was not unusual. Although these other incidents did not involve fatalities, the vehicles were damaged by pipes in comparable ways. Ultimately, the jury was convinced that the testimony regarding strangulation was the most credible. Despite the defense's efforts to offer another explanation, in May 2022, the judge denied Todd Kenthammer's request for a new trial. But Todd intends to appeal the decision. Todd's daughter, Jessica, shared, "I used to get annoyed when Dad would constantly call me or invite himself over, but now I miss that so much. I miss my parents all the time." Hello everyone. Today we will learn about another case. The case of Barbara Maybe Abel. There are books and films that help teach ways to confront criminals and appropriate behavior during kidnappings or critical situations. However, reading about these scenarios and actually experiencing them are two different things. Barbara Abel fully realized this when one of the most dangerous criminals in the U.S. showed up at her doorstep. On November 14, 1974, a scared Dale ran to his neighbor's house and began knocking frantically on the door. When the neighbor opened it, he found the boy covered in blood with strange marks on his ankles. Dale explained that the marks were from ropes used by an unknown man who had tied him and his Aunt Beverly while his mother, Barbara, was kidnapped. The neighbor quickly called 911. When the police arrived at the Abel family's home, it looked like a crime scene. There was blood everywhere, and the neighbor noted that Barbara's car was missing, along with her. Dale assisted the detectives by providing details about his mother, 31-year-old Barbara Maybe Abel, who had a twin sister named Beverly, who had been diagnosed with cerebral palsy. The twin sisters shared a deep bond from childhood. Barbara consistently supported and cared for Beverly. As they grew older, their relationship became stronger, with Barbara always striving to improve Beverly's quality of life and help her manage daily challenges. Barbara was smart, cheerful, and serious when necessary. After their father passed away, young Barbara took on many household responsibilities to help her mother. Throughout her life, she maintained a positive outlook and supported her loved ones during tough times. In April 1968, she gave birth to her son, Dale, and felt immense joy as a new mother. However, she soon faced challenges, primarily due to her breakup with the baby's father. Their disagreements had begun about a year before Dale was born. Although they hoped Dale would help resolve their issues, things only got worse. Ultimately, Barbara chose to raise her son as a single mother, later reflecting that this was the right decision for both of them, as it allowed her to create a stable environment for herself and her child. Unfortunately, the family faced a series of challenges. In May 1974, their mother passed away from an illness, leaving they in shock. It felt as if their world had collapsed. Their family had always been very close, so their mother's death deeply affected both Barbara and Beverly. Despite their grief, they tried to maintain a normal environment for the younger generation. Barbara worked diligently, writing and taking a job at a radio station, while Beverly managed household chores. They lived in a modest home in Palm Beach, Florida, and surrounded 6-year-old Dale with love and care, gradually recovering from this tragedy. On November 14, 1974, it seemed like an ordinary day for the Abel family. Beverly assisted Barbara in getting ready for work, and Dale was preparing for school. After dropping Dale off, Barbara went to the radio station where she worked as a news editor. Around noon, she tried to call Beverly, who was at home, but there was no answer. This was strange because Beverly never missed calls. She was always eager to talk, but this time she didn't even call back. Initially, Barbara thought her sister might have fallen asleep and didn't think much of it, so she continued with her work. After leaving the radio station around 5 p.m., she picked up Dale and headed home, expecting to see her sister there. As soon as they entered, she called Beverly, but there was no answer. Barbara asked her son to find his aunt, thinking she might have been listening to music and hadn't heard them come home. While Barbara went to the kitchen, she felt a sudden and intense fear that sent a chill down her spine. It was a deep, instinctual dread, and in that moment, she heard a voice say, "Don't turn around or I'll attack." Just then, her son Dale rushed into the kitchen and said that his aunt was in the bedroom and bleeding. When Barbara turned around, she saw a man pointing a weapon at her and Dale. Staying calm, she told the intruder that she needed to see her twin sister because she was worried about her. This was a risky move, but it seemed to impress the man, who agreed to let her see her sister. With the weapon still aimed at them, Barbara and Dale cautiously walked toward the bedroom, trying to keep Dale away from the armed man. Beverly was in the bedroom, lying on the bed with a gag in her mouth, crying. Barbara kissed her sister and whispered that everything would be all right. Barbara noticed that Beverly was undressed under the blanket. Unable to hold back her feelings, she confronted the attacker, questioning whether he had abused Beverly. He responded with laughter, claiming he had attempted to assault Beverly but had failed. His cruel smile and taunting words sent another chill down Barbara's spine. Following this, she tried to bribe the assailant. She revealed that she had a significant amount of money at home and was willing to give him her car keys. In return, she pleaded with him to leave them alone and not to harm them. The stranger, however, expressed his desire to take her child and reach for the boy. Barbara firmly declared that she would never give up her son and instead offered to take Dale's place. The man agreed. The assailant identified himself as Paul John Knowles and claimed he had just escaped from prison, stating he had no plans to return. He warned Barbara that he wouldn't harm her as long as she followed his orders exactly. Although Barbara knew he was lying and likely wouldn't let her go easily, she felt she had no good options left. Her primary concern was the safety of her son and her injured sister, who needed help. However, Paul was determined to keep them as hostages to buy time for his escape. He tightly bound Dale's and Beverly's hands and feet on the bed. Barbara was horrified at the thought of leaving her loved ones in such a vulnerable state, but she realized that any resistance could endanger their lives. Throughout this terrifying situation, she remained calm, speaking to her family as if everything was normal, reassuring them that it would all be over soon and that they would be all right. This approach worked. She managed to soothe her child and keep the kidnapper from becoming agitated. Barbara emphasized that they should not provoke Paul, as she had no way of knowing his true intentions. Her goal was to lead the attacker far away from her home and loved ones, then find a way to escape and alert the authorities. Paul accepted the offered money and car keys. He pointed the weapon at Barbara, then got into the car and drove away. Throughout this time, Barbara was primarily concerned about her family. More than 30 minutes later, Dale escaped and sought help. The police responded to the call. They found an abandoned car near the house, which was the vehicle used by the kidnapper. The car was registered in one state, but its license plate had been stolen from another location. Investigations revealed that the car had been stolen from a man named William Bates a couple of months earlier. Eventually, William's body was discovered, strangled, in Ohio. Inside the car's glove compartment, detectives discovered numerous credit cards and insurance policies, the majority of which belonged to Carswell Carr. The man had become a victim of a double homicide along with his 15-year-old daughter, Amanda, just days before Barbara's kidnapping. The tragedy at the Carr home in Milledgeville, Georgia, was one of the most horrifying scenes the investigators had ever witnessed. A 15-year-old girl had been brutally strangled, and her father had suffered around 30 stab wounds. It was evident that the perpetrator was a dangerous individual, prepared to kill anyone who interfered. On November 6, 1974, the Carr home, located almost 7 kilometers from where Barbara lived, was found ransacked. Inside the car, discovered near the home of Barbara, a will belonging to a man named Paul John Knowles was also found. Once law enforcement checked their database, they identified Paul as an escaped serial killer. Authorities linked him to at least 35 murders across the United States. He traveled aimlessly, leaving behind trails of blood and bodies, completely indifferent to the consequences of his actions. He selected his victims randomly, unlike most psychopaths, who usually target a specific type. He took lives with the same pleasure, whether the victim was a child or an adult. He left behind a lot of evidence, but there were no hints about his next actions. Meanwhile, Barbara and Paul were driving Barbara's car when he discovered he was wanted by the police. He forced Barbara to change the radio station. She complied and noticed that he seemed to expect the news to be on all channels, while others remained quiet, which frustrated him. At that moment, she was still unaware of his true nature. Suddenly, he confessed to having killed several people. This made Barbara uncomfortable, so she tried to change the topic to distract him from his violent past by discussing the weather, movies, or anything unrelated. Despite her attempts, he continued to casually mention his killings. Barbara began to act flirtatiously, realizing that her femininity might be her only chance for escape. Barbara decided to try to win him over. She called him sweet and offered him a cigarette. When Paul asked why she was being so nice, Barbara replied that she didn't believe he was a bad person, and even said he reminded her of the famous actor Robert Redford. This seemed to work. After the comparison, Paul became much more responsive, calm, and easier to talk to. They continued their conversation as if nothing bad had happened, as if they were simply on a date. Paul asked Barbara what she did for a living. She replied that she was a news editor on the radio and dreamed of writing a book. This excited Paul, who seemed genuinely interested in her ambitions, especially the idea that she could write a book about him. He expressed a desire to become famous, mentioning that he wanted the book's proceeds to go to his mother, but he didn't specify how he planned to achieve that fame. He repeatedly claimed to have killed many times. Although she was terrified, Barbara tried to hide her fear and remain calm. At one point, she realized that her only chance to escape was to push Paul out of the moving car, but she couldn't summon the strength or courage to do it. Barbara understood that if the investigators discovered who she was with, they would likely conclude that she was already dead. Paul was a ruthless predator with an insatiable thirst for killing. He was unpredictable and armed, which made him extremely dangerous. The most frightening aspect was that they were in an unknown location, and she had no idea where Paul was taking her. The detectives discovered that he was traveling between different states, often switching cars, and that his attacks consistently resulted in death. Occasionally, he took hostages, all of whom ended up dead. The chances of Barbara surviving her abduction were deemed very slim, but her family and friends refused to give up hope. They believed she could still be found alive. Law enforcement officials realized they had to act quickly because with every minute that passed, the likelihood of rescuing Barbara decreased. A search perimeter was set up on the roads in West Palm Beach, along with checkpoints. Authorities announced plans to intercept the suspect, Paul, focusing on Barbara's distinctive golden vehicle. However, detectives were unaware that they were too late. Paul had already taken Barbara beyond the checkpoints. Paul arrived with Barbara at a motel in Fort Pierce, about 100 kilometers from the scene of the abduction. He intended to rest there for the night and had no plans to release Barbara. To avoid suspicion, they registered as Mr. and Mrs. Smith, pretending to be on their honeymoon. Barbara felt that the hotel receptionist was suspicious of them based on her gaze. Meanwhile, she knew that Paul was carrying a weapon at his waist. To allay the receptionist's suspicions, Barbara embraced Paul and acted like a loving wife. This successfully convinced the administrator, who then handed them the key to the room. As soon as they entered the room, Paul ordered Barbara to take off her clothes. Barbara felt scared and protested, saying she was too tired, but Paul ignored her and insisted she comply. While the criminal was trying to do his dirty deed, she thought of everything that came to mind about her son and sister in order to detach herself from what was happening, but at first, she couldn't manage it. Paul grew frustrated and angry, becoming aggressive toward her. Sensing his loss of control, Barbara calmly asked him what he was trying to accomplish, which helped ease his anger momentarily. However, he later abused her. At one point, he shared with her that he had two personalities, referring to them as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, explaining his frequent mood changes. Barbara found it hard to predict his rapid shifts in temperament. After a brief period of calm, Paul suddenly ripped the bed sheets, tied Barbara up with them, and threw her onto the bed before turning on the television. Exhausted both mentally and physically, she eventually fell asleep. In her dreams, Barbara saw her deceased mother, who reassured her that everything would be fine. At that moment, Barbara understood it was a sign and resolved to do whatever it took to save herself. While she slept, she heard news reports and saw Paul intently watching a broadcast that displayed her photographs alongside those of Paul. His identity had already been established. They also reported on other crimes committed by Paul that were known at that time. Barbara was horrified. She understood that her chances of rescue were extremely low. Meanwhile, Paul reveled in the attention he was receiving from the media. Barbara recognized that he desperately wanted to become famous. Later, Paul went to sleep, tying his leg to Barbara's to prevent her from escaping. By November 15, the police still had no leads on her whereabouts. The search for Paul had escalated to a national scale. Headlines in all newspapers and on television shouted that the most dangerous criminal in the country was killing again. Barbara woke up in the morning next to Paul. She had barely slept the entire night, terrified to be tied to one of America's most wanted criminals. Paul took her to the nearest diner for breakfast. While he eagerly devoured scrambled eggs, toast, pancakes, and orange juice, Barbara couldn't eat anything. She glanced around nervously, hoping someone would recognize her, while also looking for ways to escape. However, she quickly noticed that Paul's weapon was aimed at her. He warned her not to make any sudden movements. To her dismay, she realized that no one seemed to recognize them, despite the extensive news coverage and radio alerts. Barbara understood that she couldn't rely on anyone for help. She was too scared to scream or ask for assistance, fearing it would only worsen her situation. She decided to keep playing her role, believing it would save her life. She buried her face in the plate and had a small breakfast. Afterward, Paul and Barbara returned to the motel, where he abused her again. Initially, she fought back, which only fueled his anger. At one point, Barbara feared for her life, believing he might not stop in his rage. However, she managed to save herself once more by employing her understanding and psychological tactics. She stayed calm, engaged him in conversation, and successfully avoided a violent outcome for the second time. During their dialogue, Paul mentioned that he wanted to get to know Barbara before everything changed, clearly referring to his criminal actions. Thus, she realized that she had found a way to connect with him, and her chances of a positive outcome immediately increased. Later, Paul tied her to the bed again and stepped out to make a phone call. Barbara struggled to free herself, but was unsuccessful. Then she noticed a key on the nightstand. It appeared that Paul had hastily closed the door and locked it. Oddly, it seemed as if he had done this intentionally, perhaps to protect her from himself. A few minutes later, he began banging on the door from the outside. Barbara waited in silence, her heart racing. Through the door, he told her that he knew she couldn't speak because of the gag in her mouth. He urged her not to tell the police that Paul had hurt her, claiming he never meant to harm her and was sorry for what had happened. His final words were, "I love you, and I'm leaving." After that, the sounds outside faded away. He had truly left. At first, Barbara was too scared to move. She didn't scream or call for help, fearing he was still outside, waiting for a reason to hurt her. She wondered if he had said those things to test her, as if she needed to prove something. However, she also realized that if she waited too long, he might change his mind, and she would miss her chance to escape. Finally, Barbara managed to free herself using the sharp edge of a piece of glass from the nightstand. She quickly called the front desk, telling them that a serial killer had kidnapped her, then hung up. The administrator alerted the police and requested assistance. A few minutes later, police officers opened the door. After her release, Barbara immediately called Beverly to hear the voices of both her sister and her son. They were overjoyed that she had managed to escape. However, despite the happy reunion, Barbara was still troubled by the fact that Paul was still at large and could return to harm her. Her nightmare could not truly end as long as he remained free. Fortunately, she did not suffer serious physical injuries during her kidnapping, but the psychological effects left her deeply affected. Barbara experienced post-traumatic stress disorder for a long time. She credited her faith in God for helping her family heal and chose to forgive Paul in order to find peace moving forward. By November 17, law enforcement had learned that a patrol officer, Charles Campbell, was missing and suspected he might have been abducted by Paul. The officer had attempted to stop a vehicle and approach the driver's window, but he was too late and saw a weapon aimed at Charles. Paul kidnapped Charles and took the patrol car, leaving behind Barbara's car. Shortly after, the police vehicle was found abandoned on the roadside while Paul was trying to stop another driver, James Mayer. Now, Paul had two hostages, whom he later transferred to another vehicle after killing the driver. About 100 kilometers into Georgia, a gas station employee noticed a man in uniform acting strangely in the back seat of one of the vehicles that had pulled in. He promptly alerted emergency services. After the vehicle left, the employee reported his observations, which helped law enforcement identify the car and its location. They initiated a chase and managed to intercept the vehicle. However, Paul refused to stop, even with flat tires. Driving on flat tires didn't last long. He lost control and crashed into a barrier. Paul abandoned the vehicle and fled into the woods. The police chased him closely, and explosions were heard from the forest. Despite this, Paul managed to escape again. The following day, a hunter saw Paul in the woods. He noticed that Paul was injured and reported the sighting to the authorities. Eventually, Paul was captured and refused to reveal the location of Charles and James, the driver of a stolen car. On December 18, about a month after their abduction, they were found tied to a tree in Georgia, both dead from wounds inflicted by a weapon. News of Paul, the most dangerous serial killer, spread on television, bringing relief to Barbara and her family. She had spent over a day in captivity and fully realized the threat the detectives were facing. Barbara remembered that he had escaped from prison before and feared it could happen again, leaving her and her family feeling unsafe for a while. They moved in with relatives, but this offered little comfort to Barbara. Barbara understood that she could only find peace if Paul could never harm anyone again. During this time, she faced significant psychological struggles. On the way to prison, Paul had a devious plan in mind. He was placed in the sheriff's car, and they drove to the location. The driver and accompanying officer were unaware that Paul had a paperclip with him. During the drive, Paul waited for a moment when the officers were distracted and managed to pick the lock on his handcuffs. A struggle broke out, and he seized the officer's weapon. Fortunately, the sheriff reacted quickly. He attacked Paul, emptying his entire magazine, realizing that both were in mortal danger and only decisive action could save their lives. Paul had died. This news brought immense relief to Barbara, her family, and many others who had been anxiously following the villain's actions across the country. Finally, he could no longer pose a threat, allowing everyone to breathe a sigh of relief. After much contemplation, Barbara ultimately decided to stay in her home instead of moving. Although she was going through a difficult time, the house held memories of her mother and the joyful moments of her childhood. Among these memories was her miraculous escape from one of the most dangerous serial killers in the U.S. during the 1970s. As she worked to heal from her trauma, Barbara married Jim Abel. Despite the challenges she faced, including surviving cancer, she raised Dale. Motivated by her experiences and perhaps Paul's quest for notoriety, Barbara wrote a book detailing her abduction from her own perspective. She vividly described the horrors she faced with the killer and focused on the strategies she used to escape the fate that befell many of his victims. Sadly, her sister Beverly, who passed away from cancer in 2019, never had the chance to read Barbara's book, published in 2021, but Beverly was involved in the early stages of its creation and supported her sister throughout the process. As it turned out, besides Barbara, there was another survivor named Sandy Fox, who was also a writer. There is a theory that Paul intentionally left these two women alive so they could write books about him and make him famous. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Abby Hernandez. It was a normal fall day in the small town of Conway, New Hampshire. The trees were in full bloom, with bright reds and yellows, and a cool breeze filled the air. Life went on as usual, with students rushing to class and parents going about their daily business. For Abby Hernandez, it was just like any other day. She quickly woke up, packed her things, put on her new shoes, and headed to school. She was energetic, smart, and friendly. Her classmates often commented that everything was more fun when she was around. Abby loved nature and enjoyed hiking. No one could have guessed that these hikes would lead to a nightmare that would change her life forever. That night, Abby didn't come home, and the whole town was in chaos. Wondering how such a cheerful and responsible girl could have disappeared, Abby's story illustrates the dangers of trusting someone who initially seems nice. Abby just wanted help getting home, but ended up in a dangerous situation. Born on October 12, 1998, Abby was the youngest of two daughters in her family. Xenia Hernandez, Abby's mother, worked as a nurse at a local hospital, while her father was a salesman overall. Abby's family was happy and well off. However, during Abby's high school years, her parents decided to divorce. Shortly after the divorce, her father remarried and started a new family, leaving Abby and her sister to live with their mother. Although Abby's father continued to provide financial support, his relationship with his daughters was limited to brief greetings. From a young age, Abby had many friends and frequently changed her interests. Eager to explore new ones, she participated in sports, enjoyed drawing and photography, read a lot, and learned foreign languages easily. At the age of 12, Abby joined a local outdoor club where she enjoyed hiking and climbing. She also learned outdoor survival skills that she applied in her adventures. In early October 2013, Abby was preparing for her school holidays and her birthday. She planned to go hiking with her outdoor club and had received a new pair of hiking boots. However, the shoes were a bit tight, so Abby decided to go to school to get used to it. On October 9, the girl went to school as usual and promised her mother that she wouldn't come home late. By 5 p.m., her mother, Xenia, was starting to worry because Abby still hadn't come home, and her phone was dead. After a few hours, without seeing Abby, Xenia decided to find out where she could be. Abby had left school immediately after classes, saying goodbye to her friends at the bus stop and choosing to walk home since no one had seen Abby after school. Xenia and her older daughter reported her missing to the police. A search began immediately. The police acted quickly, starting by interviewing anyone who might have seen Abby that day, including her friends, teachers, and neighbors. They confirmed that Abby had last been seen around 4 p.m. as she left the school grounds to walk home through the park, a route she took almost every day. The route was familiar to both her and her family. Police began searching the park that Abby had passed on her way home. Local volunteers and members of her club scoured the forested and scrubby trails, but found no signs or clues. Abby's phone was turned off, and no signal was recorded from it over the next few days. Police focused on tracing her possible route. They requested footage from the surveillance cameras at nearby intersections and in the park. One of the parking lot cameras captured Abby. She was wearing a school uniform and new shoes, walking calmly down the sidewalk without looking back. A few minutes after the recording, a dark-colored car entered the camera's view, seemingly headed toward her. This discovery became the first lead in the investigation. Police began checking for cars matching the description that had been in the park area that day. Unfortunately, they were unable to find any matches. Abby's story quickly became headline news on local television stations. The family recorded a distress call, and Xenia publicly urged the kidnapper to bring her daughter home. A week passed, and the chances of finding Abby alive decreased. Locals continued to search, but with no new leads. The investigation was put on hold. Despite this, the family remained hopeful. Abby's classmates and friends organized an event at school. They attached her photo to their backpacks and shared information about her disappearance on social media. Meanwhile, police noted that Abby's phone had been turned off shortly after she went missing, suggesting that the kidnapper may have intentionally turned off the tracking feature. Indicating that the abduction was premeditated, police also looked into Abby's family history. Although her parents had divorced years ago, they questioned all family members, including Abby's father. In cases like this, every possibility is considered, but her father had an alibi. He was in another city at the time of Abby's disappearance, so he was eliminated as a suspect on October 15. 6 days after Abby went missing, police received an unexpected call from a resident in the nearby area. He reported seeing a dark-colored car, similar to the one captured on security cameras, parked in an abandoned lot next to an old warehouse. The task force quickly went to investigate, but when they arrived, the car was gone, however. They did find a piece of plastic that may have fallen from the bumper in the tall grass, along with tire tracks. This evidence prompted the police to continue searching for the car. Meanwhile, Abby is locked in a room. She is tied up. Her kidnapper, a man in his 30s with long, unkempt hair, introduces himself as Nathaniel. He says he won't hurt her as long as she obeys him, but his behavior becomes increasingly erratic. Abby soon realizes that her kidnapping is part of a carefully planned plot. Despite her fear, she focuses on staying calm and recalls her survival training. She pays close attention to her surroundings, the layout of the room, and how often her kidnapper appears. She takes note of anything that could help her escape or provide information to her rescuers. Abby quickly realizes that her kidnapper is mentally unstable. He can be friendly at times, even bringing her food, but he also threatens her. If she asks too many questions, Nathaniel does not explain why she was kidnapped, but makes it clear that she will be there for a long time. Abby tries to keep her composure to avoid provoking him. The basement is dark and nearly empty, creating a stuffy atmosphere. She can smell dampness and dust, and the only sound is the echo of her captor's footsteps. Nathaniel frequently checks her bindings to make sure she cannot escape. However, Abby notices that he has tied them too loosely. When he leaves the room, she begins to shake the chair in an attempt to loosen the ropes. She almost succeeds, but Nathaniel returns just in time. He warns her not to try again, or she will suffer the consequences. After that, he begins to watch her more closely. Meanwhile, the police continued to search for the car, analyzing the footage. They determined the make of the car by examining tire tracks and some plastic debris left in the parking lot. They identified the car they were looking for and began checking with owners of similar cars in the area, as well as anyone who might have been seen at the time of Abby's disappearance. Another witness provided vital information, reporting that they had seen a man near an old warehouse. The man appeared to be acting suspiciously, looking around and trying to avoid attracting attention. The police sent a team to investigate the warehouse. When they arrived, they found that the building appeared to be abandoned, but noticed a small light coming from one of the windows. After examining the premises from the outside, they discovered footprints leading to the back door. A task force was called in to conduct a thorough search of the building. The task force moved in with stun grenades to disorient the kidnapper. Nathaniel attempted to escape, but was quickly apprehended. He resisted, shouting threats and claiming that he was innocent. Abby was initially confused and frightened by the noise, but her fear turned to relief when the door opened and she saw the police. They freed her from her chains and wrapped her in a blanket to help her feel warm and safe. The rescuers reassured her that she was safe and that her mother was waiting for her. After several days of captivity, she was finally rescued and taken to the hospital for evaluation. Although she felt mentally exhausted, she was in relatively good physical health. Medical professionals, including doctors and psychologists, worked with her to help her recover from the traumatic experience. Nathaniel Kibbe was arrested and charged with kidnapping. The investigation revealed that he had been following Abby and paying attention to her habits. Nathaniel had no permanent home, moved frequently, and had a history of minor crimes. Evidence found in his car and in a shed linked him to the kidnapping, including Abby's personal belongings. After her rescue, Abby faced many challenges. While she returned to normal life, she became more withdrawn, and it took her a long time to feel safe again. With the support of loved ones and professionals, she began to heal and even shared her story to help warn others. Abby's experience was more than just the kidnapping. It showed her incredible strength, her ability to stay calm, observe her surroundings, and seek help was crucial to her survival in extremely harsh conditions. This story serves as a reminder of the importance of being cautious, trusting your instincts, and persevering even in the most desperate times. After her release, Abby faced a long and challenging recovery process. Although she was back with her family, her life was forever changed. Initially, she avoided walking alone, stayed away from crowds, and regularly checked her windows and doors before going to bed. Gradually, she began to feel safer and started to rebuild her life. Abby was determined not to let fear control her life. She chose to use her experiences to help others. She began speaking at school assemblies and community events, emphasizing the importance of always being mindful and prioritizing personal safety. Her story resonated with many, inspiring other trauma survivors. Her kidnapper, Nathaniel Kibbe, was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. During the trial, Abby took the stand and expressed her thoughts. Her words symbolized her resilience and marked her victory over the terrible fear he had tried to instill in her. Years later, Abby discovered her passion for working with organizations that support children and young people. She played a key role in creating safety programs to ensure that others would not have to face the same situation she endured. Her determination and strength helped her regain her joy in life, despite the traumatic experiences she faced. Hello, everyone. Today, we will learn about another case, the case of Mark Angelucci. In modern life, delivery services have become an indispensable part. Bringing convenience by everything is delivered to the door. However, along with this convenience, malicious individuals can easily impersonate delivery staff to commit harmful acts, including murder. On July 11, 2020, at a house in Cedar Pines Park, California, a courier knocked on the door of Mark Angelucci, a 52-year-old successful lawyer. Mark wasn't expecting any deliveries that day, so the courier's visit felt unusual. He thought the delivery man might be carrying work-related documents. When Mark opened the door, the courier handed him a package and asked him to sign for it. As Mark reached to take the package and sign, the courier unexpectedly pulled out a weapon and attacked him multiple times. Mark was hit and fell to the ground. The attacker quickly fled the scene, leaving Mark bleeding on his doorstep. Tragically, he died of blood loss just minutes before the ambulance arrived. The only evidence left behind by the attacker was the bullets lodged in Mark's body. It was clear that the attack was not a robbery, as nothing was taken from the house. The killer's actions indicated a deep-seated hatred for the victim. The assailant attacked him at point-blank range, clearly targeting vital organs to ensure he would not survive. Detectives began their investigation by looking into the victim's close acquaintances to identify anyone who might have harbored animosity toward him or if there had been any recent disputes. Detectives also interviewed a friend of the victim, Cassie J. Mark played a significant role in Cassie's life. Although they were not romantically involved, Cassie met him while working on a documentary. She was taken aback by how different he was from the typical lawyer stereotype. Mark was genuine, positive, and cheerful, passionately discussing his work. He was not driven by profit and dedicated considerable time to volunteer efforts. Cassie and Mark had a strong bond built on mutual respect. She viewed him as her greatest source of support and protection. As a result, she struggled to cope with his absence. Cassie regarded him almost as family, noting that he never abandoned her during tough times. When she married in 2018, Mark traveled 7 hours to congratulate her. Mark is a well-known and respected individual who maintains multiple social media accounts. He regularly updates his followers on his career achievements and shares motivational messages. Additionally, he provides consulting services and is dedicated to his work. Instead of starting a family, Mark chose to focus on his career as his top priority and true passion, which has helped him become one of the best lawyers in the state. Throughout his career, he has accumulated considerable wealth, owns a large house, and drives a luxury car. He always dresses smartly and maintains a neat appearance. During an in-depth investigation into Mark's activities, the police discovered that he was involved in the men's rights movement. He joined this movement while studying law after witnessing his friends struggle to obtain help from the police following an incident of domestic violence. Mark also supported men in securing custody during divorce cases, often providing these services for free with the assistance of a well-resourced lawyer. He viewed this work as a way to contribute to a better future for the American community. In 1997, Mark aimed to highlight the challenges men face in legal situations, advocating for equal rights for both men and women, and for fair treatment regardless of gender. His actions could be interpreted in many different ways and could cause hostility, leading to him being attacked. Given that Mark was a popular lawyer without any family, Cassie worried that the investigation could lose momentum without appropriate attention from relatives. Consequently, she became an activist, urging the authorities to take action. Later, Cassie wrote a book and produced a film about him. The police were struggling to find leads, and the lockdown made the situation even more difficult. Cassie decided to take an active role in searching for the person responsible. She believed that there were no potential murderers among Mark's close friends and thought the crime might be a random act of revenge. However, she was convinced that Mark's legal work held the key to solving the case. Mark often represents less wealthy clients, and each win can cause resentment among influential people, which can spur an unstable individual to action. To identify potential suspects, the police needed to interview many people and review Mark's recent cases. Unfortunately, they were unable to gather any useful information. On July 19, 2020, just a week after the Mark attack occurred, an unknown attacker opened fire at the home of New Jersey District Judge Esther Salas. Her college-age son, Daniel Anderl, answered the door and briefly spoke with a courier before being attacked in the chest. After Daniel fell, the assailant attacked at Mark 3 times. Both were seriously injured but survived as the attacker fled. Judge Esther was in the basement during the attack and remained unharmed. Given the severity of the attack, the FBI was brought in to assist local law enforcement in identifying the person who fired attacks at the judge's home. Authorities believed there was a connection between the two attacks, even though they occurred in different states and at different times. After conducting ballistics tests, investigators confirmed that the same .380 caliber pistol was used in both attacks, reinforcing their theory of a single attacker. Additionally, several neighbors reported seeing a light-colored car leaving the area. The attacker wore a mask, making it difficult for witnesses to provide a description. With the motive still unclear, law enforcement officials were concerned that the killer might strike again, potentially targeting others connected to the judicial system. It appears that Judge Esther Salas was the target of the second attack. Esther had an impressive career, even running for the Senate in 2011. She lived with her husband, Mark, who worked in the justice system as a prosecutor and later as an attorney. Esther worked hard to achieve success, starting as a public defender and consistently studying hard, believing that education would be the key to realizing her dreams. She ultimately rose to become one of the leaders in her field. Daniel's parents were both dedicated and hardworking individuals. They often handled multiple cases simultaneously. In 2018, he decided to pursue a career in law and enrolled in law school. He was accepted into the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., a prestigious institution with many notable alumni. After Daniel started school, his parents maintained constant communication with him. They described Daniel as a good kid who didn't associate with bad influences, was naturally distanced from criminal activities, and was not aggressive. He had no enemies, did not suffer from mental health issues, and had not encountered any problems in recent months. The assault on this cheerful and active young man was a devastating blow to both his family and their tight-knit community, particularly for Daniel's girlfriend. Relatives of Daniel reported that, on July 17, he had spent time with friends. It was a lovely day, and he celebrated his 20th birthday with his parents and closest friends. No one could have predicted that this gathering would be their last together. During his meeting with Daniel, there were no mentions of any issues. Everything appeared to be fine. Daniel was not an aggressive person, making it difficult to believe he had any dangerous enemies. 2 days later, there was a knock at the door. Mark looked over the railing from the second floor and saw a man in a courier uniform standing outside with a large package. He was surprised that a courier would come on a Sunday, a day when delivery services usually do not operate. No one was expecting any deliveries, especially during the lockdown, which made the situation even more unusual. Before anyone could react, Daniel cheerfully went to the door and opened it. According to Daniel's father, the courier asked Daniel to call for Judge Esther Salas to sign for a delivery envelope. While Daniel hesitated, trying to remember where his mother might be, his father started to go down the stairs to the door. Suddenly, explosions rang out. Mark likely startled the attacker, who then opened fire, hitting him as he instinctively tried to shield himself. By the time Esther emerged from the basement, her son had been attacked in the chest, and her husband had been struck by 3 bullets. The attacker had already escaped. Immediately, she called 911. Daniel and Mark were quickly taken to the hospital, where doctors worked hard to stabilize them. Daniel was Mark and Esther's only son. Before his birth, Esther endured 3 heartbreaking miscarriages, which were very difficult for her to handle. She and her husband had longed for a child, but faced repeated disappointments. When Daniel was born, it felt like a miracle and the realization of their dream for their family. They had high expectations for him. Despite serious injuries, Daniel remained conscious and became an important witness for the police. Detectives came to interview him in his hospital room. Daniel could only catch a brief glimpse of the attacker and was unable to provide a detailed description as the attacker was wearing a mask. Sadly, his condition worsened and he passed away, leaving his family devastated. Many loved ones gathered to support them during this tragic time. News of the attack on the courier quickly spread, causing widespread panic. With the attacker still at large, no one felt safe. Police have faced pressure to speed up their investigation, but the 2020 lockdown has severely hampered their efforts to solve the two murders. Law enforcement continued to sift through the limited information available, while multiple federal and state agencies were investigating Andrel's murder. Another case was unfolding 150 miles away in the Catskill Mountains of New York State. Police discovered an abandoned vehicle and a body on a dead-end road. An identification card found at the scene revealed that the deceased was Roy Den Hollander, a 72-year-old lawyer from New York. The small community was shocked by this crime, as violent incidents were extremely rare in the area, with the crime rate nearly at zero. It is unusual, considering that Roy is a seasoned attorney with considerable experience. Could this be another murder mystery linked to a series of attacks on individuals within the justice system? However, unlike typical crime scenes, a gun was found next to Roy's body, raising suspicions that he may have taken his own life. Police have determined that the gun used in the case was a .30 380, and ballistics tests have confirmed that it matches the bullet that killed Mark and Daniel, as well as Roy himself. Detectives speculated that Roy might have attacked the judge's family before traveling to upstate New York, where he eventually took his own life. As investigators continued to search Roy's crime scene, they found a FedEx envelope addressed to Judge Esther Salas and a home address in San Bernardino County, California, in his car. Investigators also learned that Roy took a cross-country train ride to California in early July. He is seen here at the San Bernardino train station on July 7, 2020, wearing a medical mask and holding a cup of coffee, and was later seen on other security cameras as he approached Mark's home. These evidences suggested his involvement in both murders, although his motive remained unclear. Detectives began investigating Roy's background and uncovered several troubling details. They examined his computer and phone, revealing that he had written a memoir filled with questionable content, almost 2,000 pages long. After reviewing his diaries, the police concluded that he was an unstable individual with mental health issues. The dedication in his book stated, "To my mother, may she burn in hell." In it, Roy expressed his hatred toward his mother, blaming her for his lack of maternal love and care during his childhood. He also attributed his brother's death, which occurred under mysterious circumstances before Roy's birth, to her neglect. After she passed away, he scattered her ashes in the grass as a tribute to his late brother. Roy was an impressive and articulate lawyer who joined a local human rights organization. By 1999, he had built a strong resume, but he had one major flaw: his obsession with women. He frequented clubs and bars, often seeking out girls aged 16 to 18. During this time, he became infatuated with a model and eventually married a 20-year-old named Angelina. After moving to the United States together, their relationship quickly became troubled. They soon filed for divorce, each accusing the other of abuse. Roy's memoir included many sexist and racist comments, revealing his misogynistic views, which suggests that his wife's claims of abuse may have had some basis in reality. In his journal, Roy expressed deep anger toward women, especially his ex-wife, whom he labeled a stripper with questionable morals. He felt used by her, believing she had taken advantage of him to obtain her green card before leaving him after a challenging divorce. This contributed to Roy developing a hatred for all women and becoming a strong advocate for men's rights. He initiated multiple lawsuits to protect men's interests, targeting places like bars and clubs that allowed women free entry. He also sued Columbia University, his former school, accusing it of being sexist. Although he lost these legal battles, he continued to passionately advocate for men's rights. Thus, it was surprising that his first murder victim was Mark, a fellow men's rights activist and anti-feminist lawyer who seemingly shared Roy's views. To understand the motive behind the murder, police interviewed Roy's former colleagues. They revealed that Roy believed Mark was infringing on his legal territory, as both were part of the same community fighting for men's rights. This community sought to promote equality between men and women while opposing any form of insult or degradation. However, Roy had been expelled from this group due to his inappropriate behavior. Members of the coalition rejected the misogyny that Roy displayed. After his divorce, Roy was facing significant personal issues, and his professional life was deteriorating as well. He lost numerous legal cases, went bankrupt, and fell into alcoholism. There were also rumors about his substance use. Despite these struggles, Roy viewed himself as a public figure and often shared odd videos online, displaying erratic behavior, including episodes of anger. While many people dismissed his actions, those close to him realized that he was in an alarming state, but no one intervened in time. In 2018, Roy announced on social media that he had been diagnosed with terminal melanoma. He expressed frustration over not receiving adequate medical assistance and even sued the hospital for negligence. The case was dismissed. It appeared that Roy was seeking public attention or trying to explain his professional setbacks. He continued this behavior until July 2020. Meanwhile, Mark and Esther were experiencing career success, frequently appearing on television and gaining popularity. Despite their rising careers, neither Mark nor Esther nor their colleagues viewed Roy as a threat. He did not attend men's rights conferences, did not make threats, and had limited interactions with potential victims, so no one suspected he posed any danger. The night before the crime, Roy lost another case. After he filed an appeal, Judge Esther Salas denied his motion, and he was later removed from the case when the client switched lawyers. Frustrated, he wrote an angry journal entry, criticizing Judge Esther for being lazy and incompetent. Possibly this became the turning point for the murder, but primarily, he decided to eliminate his competitor, Mark. Now, the motives for the crime became clear. The next victims of this tragedy were Daniel and his father, Mark. Daniel's father thought that Roy's first bullet was meant for him, but Daniel bravely defended his father and lost his life in the process. In reality, Mark suffered 3 serious injuries and spent a long time in the hospital. Thankfully, none were life-threatening. He pleaded with the police to find the person responsible for his son's death. Fortunately, the criminal did not harm anyone else and eventually took his own life with the same weapon he used to kill his 2 victims. On the last day of his life, Roy went to the Catskill Mountains that later became his burial site. This location is famous for trout fishing and is surrounded by luxurious homes. The FBI discovered that Roy had spent his childhood at a nearby refugee camp, suggesting that this place held significant meaning for him, possibly representing the happiest times of his life. As the police examined Roy's troubling notes, they found a list of names that included lawyers, prominent doctors, and other medical professionals who appeared to be next on his list. Detectives noted that none of the individuals on the list had been harmed by Roy except for 2 previous victims. It seemed he may have intended to target them, but changed his mind, possibly due to a decline in his health, which ultimately led him to take his own life. Investigators were still uncertain if he acted alone or had accomplices. They alerted everyone on the list about the potential danger in case Roy's associates became active. The individuals were scared and requested protection. Meanwhile, Detectives needed time to sort through a large volume of information, including 2,000 pages of Roy's memoirs. After a lengthy examination of the potential victims list, the police were still unable to determine what motivated Roy to harm them. It seemed that all of this was unfounded. This ultimately managed to calm all the people on the list, as the FBI agents established that Roy acted alone and had no accomplices. Forensic psychiatrists determined that his actions were indicative of psychosis, stemming from personal disorders and significant life struggles. 6 months after the attack, Judge Esther Salas's husband, Mark, is still recovering, though progress has been slow. Meanwhile, Esther has begun advocating for changes in state law to strengthen protections for judges. She specifically called for a ban on the public release of judges' personal information, a necessary step to prevent disgruntled criminals from seeking revenge after adverse rulings. In November 2020, Esther was successful in this effort. The new law, named after her son, was signed into law by the governor of New Jersey. Since then, judges' addresses have no longer been publicly available in the state, marking a significant change from the past when this information was easily accessible online. Esther believes this measure will better protect judges and judicial staff, who are often at risk of being attacked by disgruntled defendants. Her own devastating loss, the death of her son, best exemplifies this threat. Now, Esther Salas and Mark Anderl are taking this effort to the federal level, calling on Congress to consider and pass similar legislation. For them, this is more than just a legal fight. It is also a way to honor the memory of their son, Daniel, who tragically died at the age of 20. They view Daniel's death as a cowardly act of revenge and are determined to use this loss as motivation to push for justice and protect others in the future. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore, the case of Melanie Wallner. On June 9, 2009, a woman who owned a house where a couple had previously lived was cleaning and preparing the place for new tenants after the former residents had moved out. She attempted to give the large wheelie bins to the garbage men, but they refused to empty them because they were too heavy and smelled bad. The bins were overflowing, and she had no idea what was inside. She and her husband struggled to lift the bins as the garbage men requested, so they took some of the contents out themselves to make it easier for disposal during the next collection. Inside the bins, they discovered a pile of trash along with several tightly sealed black plastic bags. When they cleared away some of the debris, they found what looked like human legs infested with insects. The homeowner panicked and immediately called the police to report the incident. When the police arrived, they found human remains in a wheelie bin. Those unfamiliar with crime and the smell of decomposing bodies mistook it for spoiled food, but seasoned officers quickly recognized the distinctive odor. The situation was made worse by the hot weather. The remains were in poor condition and were found inside a sleeping bag before forensic experts arrived to examine the scene and collect evidence. The bin was examined both inside and outside, resulting in the collection of several fingerprints. The police focused closely on the area around and inside the house. Despite hours of searching, they found no suspicious signs, no evidence of violence, no struggle, no robbery, and no traces that could indicate an assault or murder. The police needed to quickly identify the deceased, as this could provide new clues. They were unsure whether the victim had any connection to the house. The dumpster was located next to the house on Hamilton Avenue, raising the possibility that the body had been placed there on purpose to throw the investigation off track. The police investigated the previous occupants of the house. The last occupant was a man named Peter Wallner, who had lived alone since his wife died 3 years earlier. His wife, Melanie Wallner, was 30 when she passed away. After examining dental records, it was confirmed that the body found by the medical examiner was indeed Melanie. It is unclear how her body came to be there, as Melanie had disappeared in 2006. When asked about it, Peter burst into tears and explained that his wife had died suddenly in late summer from a brain aneurysm. This raised a puzzling question. How did her body end up in the dumpster 3 years later? The owner of the house was sure that Melanie's body was buried or cremated at the time of her death. Melanie was 30 years old. The heroine of the story was from South Africa, where she was born and raised. She was described as bright and cheerful, but around the age of 1996, she decided to move to the UK. It is difficult to imagine how large-scale this change was in the girl's life, but she dreamed of building a career and understood that in Africa, there were no such prospects. From a young age, she dreamed of England and also wanted to open her own business, but first, after moving, she immediately got a job in a fast food chain to provide for herself. After a while, she was noticed, and the girl was promoted to manager of the establishment. It was during this period that she met her future husband, named Peter Wallner. Peter was an immigrant from Germany who also lived and worked in the UK. He and Melanie started dating in 2001. After a while, they decided to get married, and Melanie took her husband's last name. The couple rented a house on Hamilton Avenue, and both quickly found jobs at a local restaurant in a prestigious hotel. Peter worked as a chef, while Melanie worked as a waitress. Their friends, acquaintances, and neighbors knew them as a friendly and sociable couple. They rarely argued and were always polite. Melanie often expressed her love for her husband and her desire to have children when she was more settled. It seemed that things were going well for them. However, in 2006, their situation changed dramatically. In early September, Melanie's friends and family were informed that she had died suddenly from a brain aneurysm without warning. She had never complained of health problems and rarely went to the hospital. Peter informed her family of her death and promptly returned her ashes to them. No one knew the details of her death. To back up his story, he showed Melanie's relatives a death certificate, and they accepted his account. This information was confirmed by several others. In June 2009, Melanie's body was discovered in a trash bin, raising serious concerns about the circumstances surrounding her death. It was clear that Melanie had been murdered. Her death did not appear to be a suicide or an accident. The police quickly focused on Peter, the prime suspect in the case. He seemed to be hiding information, especially when he lied about his wife's death being due to illness. However, the police were unable to locate his new address. They traced his journey to a hotel where he had stayed after moving, but he was not there when they arrived. A search of his hotel room yielded no useful evidence, and the hotel manager could not recall anything unusual about Peter's stay, noting that he had only stayed one night before leaving the next morning. Forensic experts are working to determine what happened to Melanie and where her body had been for the past 3 years. If she had really been dead for that long, her body could not have been in the trash all that time. It must have been placed there recently. While investigating Melanie's background, the police discovered evidence of a history of deception by Peter, who had shown Melanie's family a photo of a supposedly fake death certificate. His involvement in the case became increasingly clear, making it necessary to arrest him. A forensic expert took over the case and quickly noticed that the body had been frozen before being placed in the dumpster. Another important question arose for the medical examiner when he took a closer look at Melanie's skull. He discovered a severe blow to the head, which had been caused by a blunt object. The forensic expert pointed out that if she had not received immediate medical attention after such a serious injury, she would have died about half an hour later. The evidence clearly showed that Melanie had been murdered. In order to uncover the details surrounding her death, it was necessary to speak to Peter, who was still missing. During the investigation, the police focused on the addresses where the couple had lived during their marriage and after Melanie's death. They sought information from neighbors and acquaintances who could provide insight into recent events in their lives. During the investigation, officers met with a local shop owner who said he knew Peter well, as Peter used to shop there almost every day. However, Peter had stopped coming to the shop a few weeks prior. The shop owner had heard rumors that Peter might be going abroad, possibly to visit family in Germany, but he had no specific details. The shop owner shared that, before moving out of his house on Hamilton Avenue, Peter had offered to sell him his old freezer. Peter mentioned that he no longer needed it, and the shop owner agreed to buy it for $20. The low price was due to the fact that the freezer had a very strong smell, which the shop owner could not figure out how to fix, and he subsequently gave it to his brother. This led the police to believe they were on the right track, as it was likely that the freezer had kept Melanie's body frozen for so many years. Police also spoke to the store owner's brother, who had stopped using the freezer because of the smell. Unsure of the source of the odor, he set the freezer aside without further investigation. While forensic experts did not find anything suspicious inside the house, police did discover a mattress that was almost completely covered in blue paint. The mattress was removed for analysis, and, as expected, a large amount of blood was found underneath the paint. DNA testing confirmed that the blood matched the profile of the murdered Melanie Wallner, indicating that this was where she had been killed. Pieces of plastic were found in the shed, and testing confirmed that they originated from a freezer that had been sold. Additionally, old red stains on the pieces were identified as Melanie's blood. This evidence indicated that her body had been kept in a freezer for 3 years before being discarded in the trash. Despite the information gathered, the investigation was unable to determine when the murder occurred, the motive behind the attack, or the specifics of the incident. Police contacted Melanie's family in South Africa. After her death, they received her belongings, including her diary. Upon examining them, police discovered that the couple's marriage had been deteriorating in the days leading up to her death. Melanie found out that Peter was having an affair with a woman who worked at the same hotel where they both were employed. After discovering this, she confronted Peter and told him that she knew about the affair. Peter was upset and assured her that it would never happen again. She chose to forgive him and give their marriage another chance. In her diary, she expressed her deep love for her husband and her determination to save their family and their relationship. Melanie even considered quitting her job. She believed that Peter's infidelity might have stemmed from their deep attachment to each other, as they spent every moment together without any privacy. However, Peter remained unchanged. One of the last entries in Melanie's diary revealed that she had once again caught her husband being unfaithful. The police believe this may have led to an escalation of conflict, prompting Peter to kill her. The police contacted Melanie's family for more information. They learned that the last time anyone had spoken to Melanie was on August 27, 2006. Several friends confirmed that they had had dinner with her that evening. This encounter provided important evidence, as Melanie had used her bank card to pay at a Chinese restaurant. This information helped clarify the timeline. No one saw her again after that evening, and in early September, her husband Peter announced that she had died of a brain aneurysm. A forensic pathologist examined Melanie's stomach and found undigested food from the Chinese restaurant where she had last dined with friends. This suggested that she had died just hours after their encounter, on the night of August 28, 2006. Neighbors from the house on Hamilton Avenue revealed that Peter had rented a truck to move various belongings. They quickly obtained the license plate number by contacting the moving company, allowing the police to track the truck's movements. The police began monitoring city surveillance cameras in an attempt to find the fugitive. They tracked the truck's last payment, which showed that Peter had used it about 2 weeks before the investigation began, with a stop at the port of Dover. Unfortunately, this is where the trail went cold, prompting the police to seek the public's help. They hoped that someone might recognize Peter from a photo alert. Surprisingly, it was Peter who contacted the police, expressing shock at the unusual circumstances surrounding his wife's body. He insisted he had nothing to do with it and claimed he was on holiday in Malta with his new girlfriend. The police invited him back to discuss the events surrounding his wife's death to determine whether he could be cleared of the charges. He agreed to return. Upon arriving in the UK, Peter, 30, was arrested and taken to a police station. His questioning began on June 11, 2009. Peter soon admitted that he was responsible for his wife's death, but claimed that he had acted in self-defense. According to Peter, on August 27, 2006, he had an argument with his wife, Melanie, about the state of their home. The argument escalated when Melanie became emotional and punched him in the face. She then grabbed a rolling pin from the kitchen and lunged at him, causing Peter to punch her to the ground. Peter then tried to leave, but suddenly, Melanie stabbed him 3 times in the leg. To prove his story, he showed everyone the scar on his leg. Peter felt scared, shocked, and in pain. Fearing for his life, he picked up a large frying pan and hit Melanie in the face several times with the edge of the pan. She collapsed and lost consciousness. Peter insisted that it was all an accident. Panicked, Peter decided not to call the police. Instead, he bought a large freezer and placed it in the shed, where he hid Melanie's body. Over the next few days, he cleaned out the house to erase any evidence of the fight. He then contacted Melanie's family in South Africa and lied that his young wife had suddenly died. Melanie's mother came to England to support Peter and to collect her belongings and ashes. Peter burned a large amount of old wood and boards to create ashes, which he then hid in an urn along with an engraved wedding ring. He subsequently gave the urn to Melanie's mother. Melanie's family held a memorial service, and Peter was present, appearing distraught as he delivered an emotional speech about the loss of his wife. Melanie's mother and family were shocked when they learned the truth about how she had died. Peter claimed that his actions were in self-defense and admitted to manslaughter. Meanwhile, the police reopened the case and re-evaluated the circumstances surrounding Melanie's death. They suspected that she had been beaten to death while she slept. Furthermore, a forensic expert found inconsistencies in Peter's testimony. In addition to the wound on Melanie's face, which appeared to have been inflicted with a frying pan, there was also a knife wound that Peter failed to mention. Peter could not explain how the scar on his leg had occurred, and no medical records were found to clarify this. It is possible that he inflicted the wounds on himself to cover something up. Peter later changed his story, claiming that Melanie had just woken up and left the room with a mask on, which she pulled up to her forehead before the argument began. Peter chose not to remove the mask and pulled it down to cover her face. Despite the evidence against him, Peter maintained that the crime was committed in self-defense. However, as the police presented more evidence, his demeanor changed. He became increasingly anxious and aggressive, attempting to create new justifications for the findings. The motive for the crime remains unclear, but it is suspected to be related to Peter's infidelity and a love triangle. Over time, more evidence has emerged to support this theory. Some police officers traveled to Malta to collect new clues, as Peter had been living there for several weeks. They hoped to find evidence relevant to the investigation. In the house where Peter lived with his new girlfriend, they discovered a large box filled with souvenirs and other documents, indicating that Peter was very organized. Among these items was a fake death certificate for Melanie. The police then examined phone records, letters, and other digital information. This evidence confirmed that shortly before the tragedy, Melanie had discovered her husband's infidelity, which matched the entries in her diary. Peter's new girlfriend was a colleague at the hotel. The day after the tragedy, August 28, 2006, which was also Peter's birthday, he went on a date with new girlfriend. They returned to Peter's house and spent the night there, in the same bed where Melanie had been murdered just the day before. When confronted about this, Peter denied everything and offered numerous excuses, but it was clear that he was lying. Peter went on trial in May 2010. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter and obstruction of justice. While Peter maintained that he acted in self-defense, the evidence presented by the police and the prosecution was compelling. The prosecution argued that Peter had acted intentionally. They believed that Peter wanted to continue his relationship with his new girlfriend and saw Melanie as an obstacle. The prosecution contended that murder was unnecessary. Peter could have simply ended his marriage since they had no children and no assets to divide. The couple did not have any insurance, which ruled out any financial motive. Peter soon broke up with his co-worker and began dating other women while pretending to be a grieving widower. One of his girlfriends had a daughter with him and later recounted their relationship in court. She explained that when Peter found out she was pregnant, he was initially confused but agreed to support her decision to keep the baby, promising to be there for her. However, he left for Germany shortly afterward, claiming that his father had died and he needed help with the funeral. He stayed to support his grieving mother, later telling his girlfriend that his mother had also died of a stroke and that he needed to arrange another funeral. He frequently disappeared for periods of time. When he reappeared, he said he had been in the hospital with kidney problems, although she had seen him around town. She later gave birth and raised the child alone. She discovered that Peter had been lying to her the entire time. He was a pathological liar. However, she never believed that he was capable of murder and was shocked to learn what he had done to his wife. The prosecution reconstructed the events of that tragic day, August 27, 2006. Melanie returned home from dinner with friends at a Chinese restaurant and went to bed. At that moment, Peter saw an opportunity to get rid of his troublesome wife. He wanted to ensure she was defenseless, so he picked up the heaviest frying pan in the kitchen. He smashed the pan into his sleeping wife's face several times, knocking her unconscious and fatally injuring her. For 3 years, Melanie's body was hidden in a freezer in the shed. When Peter finally decided to leave his Hamilton Avenue home, he planned to go to Malta with a new girlfriend. However, Peter faced a problem. He needed to dispose of Melanie's body to avoid arrest. He decided to put her body in a sleeping bag outside. He wrapped it in cling film and placed it at the bottom of a wheelie bin, covering it with black bin bags. Peter asked his neighbor to move the bin outside before the rubbish collectors arrived. The neighbor agreed and pushed the bin out of the way. Noticing that it was unusually heavy, the cleaners refused to move an overloaded bin. Had everything gone according to plan, Melanie's body would have been dumped in a landfill, allowing him to escape detection. Fortunately, her body was discovered. He even sold the freezer in which Melanie's body had been stored for 3 years. This decision was a serious mistake, as it gave the police access to vital evidence. The defense made several attempts to substantiate Peter's claim of self-defense, but his account appeared implausible. Following the trial, Peter Wallner was convicted of murdering Melanie Wallner and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Matthew Hoffman. Matthew Hoffman was born on November 1, 1980. Little is known about his childhood, but he was probably a quiet and somewhat withdrawn child who was loved by his parents. Although there may have been some strange traits in his behavior, they did not indicate that Matthew was a danger to others. He was very fond of plants, especially leaves. Matthew was a loner with no friends, and many people thought he was strange, even suspecting that he might have mental problems. He graduated from high school but did not pursue further education. After getting a job as a plumber's assistant in Colorado, Matthew, with no friends or acquaintances to help him, secretly stayed in a corner of one of his clients' apartments while they were away. When he learned that the landlord was returning, instead of cleaning up and leaving, he set fire to the apartment to hide his presence. Matthew was arrested and sentenced to 8 years in prison, but he only served 6 years and was released early for good behavior. In 2009, after returning to his hometown in Ohio, he bought a small house. He began dating a woman who had a young son from a previous relationship. Things went well for a while, as they all lived together until late 2010. Matthew's neighbors noticed a sudden change in his behavior. Previously, he enjoyed playing with the neighborhood kids and his girlfriend's son. However, he recently became irritable and angry. His girlfriend was fed up with this behavior, so she packed up and moved out of his house with her son. As a result, Matthew's situation worsened, and he lost his part-time job as a tree trimmer. The reason he was fired was that he was not doing a good job. Instead of working, he would sit in a tree for hours, staring into space. After losing his job, he began to live more frugally. A neighbor reported that he turned off the lights in his entire house to save on bills. He then built a platform in one of the trees on his property and spent hours sitting there, watching the neighborhood. Neighbors advised their children not to play outside while Matthew was in the tree, as they found his behavior very disturbing. He would sometimes catch and kill squirrels, cook them, and eat them, which one neighbor believed was because he had no money and could not afford food. A few weeks after breaking up with his girlfriend, she returned to collect the last of their belongings. They had a heated argument that escalated, and Matthew attempted to strangle her. Although she initially filed a lawsuit, she changed her mind and dropped the case a few days later. In November 2010, Matthew began behaving strangely and was found stealing various items. He soon developed a new hobby of breaking into homes in his small town. One house that caught his attention was located in the suburbs near a wooded area. He spent a lot of time in the trees watching the house. The occupants of the house included 32-year-old Tina Herman, her 2 children, 13-year-old Sarah Maynard, and 11-year-old Cody Maynard, and her boyfriend. The garage door was not properly locked, allowing Matthew easy access. Although there are neighboring houses, they are far enough away that no one can see or hear anything unusual at night. On November 9, 2010, Matthew was in the woods when he saw Tina's boyfriend leave for work at the distribution center at 3 a.m. It was still dark, and he was supposed to be gone for at least the day. Matthew then noticed 2 children leaving for school, followed by Tina, who left at 9 a.m. Thinking that she was leaving for work, Matthew decided to pack his things and break into Tina's house through the garage. He spent the next few hours exploring the rooms and slowly gathering items to put in bags. Usually, burglars are quick and take what they want before leaving. However, Matthew moved slowly around the house. When he heard a car approaching, he realized he might be spotted, so he quickly hid in the furthest room, which turned out to be Tina's bedroom. Tina Herman returned home after a walk with her friend Stephanie. They had the day off and had gone shopping together. When she got home, Tina took her bag into the bedroom to put away the things she had bought. In the meantime, Matthew hit her on the head with the handle of a large knife, causing her to flinch and scream. He then attacked her. Stephanie, Tina's friend, took the things she had bought out of the car to bring into the house. When she got inside, Matthew suddenly attacked her. She tried to escape, but he was faster and caught up with her. A dog lived in the house, and it started barking loudly during the chaos. Matthew eventually dealt with the dog. After the crime, instead of running away, Matthew dragged the 2 bodies into the bathroom. There, he started to process their bodies and place them in trash bags. After filling the bags, he carried them to Stephanie's car, which was parked nearby, and loaded them into the back of the car. After finishing, he returned to the house to clean up the scene. While inside, he heard Tina's children, Cody and Sarah, coming home from school, so he hid and waited for them to come in. Shortly after, Matthew attacked Cody. The boy tried to escape, but Matthew struck him in the back of the head, killing him instantly. Meanwhile, Sarah ran down the hall to her room and tried to close the door to keep Matthew from entering, but he broke it open. Instead of killing Sarah, he found an electrical cord in her room and tied her up. He then covered her head with a pillowcase, picked her up, and carried her into the kitchen, where he laid her on the floor. Sarah was silent for an hour, listening to Matthew handling the body Cody's and mumbling to himself. He then picked Sarah up, carried her outside, and placed her in the back seat of Stephanie's car, along with the body bags. After driving about a mile to his parking spot in a secluded area, Matthew carried Sarah into his car and drove home. When he arrived, he locked her in the bathroom after gagging her. He then went back to Stephanie's parking lot to hide the garbage bags containing the body parts. He returned to his house, where he found himself exhausted and falling asleep. But before he fell asleep, he tied Sarah to him with a rope to prevent her from escaping. While Matthew slept, Sarah looked around the house and saw something strange. The floors and walls were covered with leaves, and there were bags filled with leaves scattered all over the house. When Matthew woke up, he decided to move Sarah to the basement, a small corner used for storage. He placed a blanket inside, put a pile of leaves on the ground, chained her up, and gagged her again. Matthew planned to go back to Tina's house to burn it, because he couldn't clean up the blood at the scene. He drove Stephanie's car to Tina's house and parked it in the garage. He then took Tina's pickup truck and went to his house to get a gas tank to burn it. However, the pickup broke down on the way. Not knowing what to do, Matthew abandoned the car in the university parking lot and walked home. The basement where Sarah was held was cold, dark, and damp. She was constantly freezing and had no choice but to lie down or sit because of the low ceilings. Matthew provided her with spoiled food and prevented her from using the bathroom. He wrapped a garbage bag around her waist to serve as a makeshift diaper and did not allow her to clean herself. The next day, Tina and Stephanie's co-workers noticed that they did not show up for work, raising concerns. Tina's supervisor went to her home and discovered that Tina's pickup truck was missing. Looking through the window, she saw an unusual mess inside the house. The employee eventually broke the window to enter the house, where she discovered a significant amount of blood and immediately called the police. When the police arrived and searched the house, they found no one there. The officers discovered that the children had not attended school that day. Inside the house, although no bodies were found, there was a significant amount of blood in almost every room. The investigation was aided by the discovery of empty trash bags in the house, which contained receipts for items purchased at a hardware store. Officers took this information to the store and requested video footage from a specific date and time. Although the man who made the purchase was not clearly visible in the footage, they were able to track him as he walked to his car, identifying it as a Toyota. At the same time, a search was underway for Tina's missing pickup truck, which was eventually found in the university parking lot. Inside the truck, police found empty gas cans. The police then gathered all the evidence and focused their search on the drivers of Toyotas. Ironically, Matthew's driver's license had a picture of him wearing the same shirt seen in the store footage, leading to his identification. The police deployed a special weapons and tactics team to Matthew's home. When they entered, Matthew, who was asleep on the couch and unaware of the situation, did not resist and was taken into custody without incident. After the arrest, the police conducted a search of Matthew's home and found Sarah in the basement. She was lying on a pile of leaves, tied up, but still alive. The police were shocked by the state of Matthew's home, which was littered with leaves, bags of leaves hanging from the walls, and the floor covered in leaves. In the living room, there was a pile of leaves, large enough to raise suspicions about what might be hidden underneath, especially given the disappearances of Stephanie, Tina, and Cody. Despite the chaos of the scene, the police found no evidence of a crime. They discovered strange and seemingly meaningless drawings on the doors and kitchen walls. The refrigerator contained the bodies of beavers and squirrels. When questioned, Matthew remained calm and quiet. He claimed the murders were the result of a botched burglary, Matthew intended to steal valuables and was surprised when Tina and Stephanie returned home. In a panic, he killed them. The police rejected the initial account, asserting that the crime was premeditated. Matthew found that the garage was open and that in the morning, everyone had left the house. Near the property, they found a sleeping bag and a burned area under a tree, which showed signs of having been climbed multiple times for a better view. They also found large bags of trash in the garage, along with a receipt indicating that Matthew had purchased them a week before the murders. Prosecutors pointed out that burglars typically do not linger in homes for hours. They take what they need and leave quickly. The police asked Matthew where he had hidden the victims. Initially, Matthew refused to reveal the location of the bodies, which led to a deal being struck. Facing the death penalty for his crimes, he was promised a reduced sentence if he disclosed the location of the bodies. Although he initially resisted, Matthew eventually wrote a confession and agreed to lead the police to the scene. He took them to a large tree in the reserve, where he had created a hollow at the top, accessible only by climbing equipment. Inside, the police discovered large plastic garbage bags filled with body parts. Matthew also requested that the police not damage the tree, as he believed it was sacred. However, the tree was cut down. On January 6, 2011, Matthew Hoffman pleaded guilty to the murders of Tina, Cody, and Stephanie, as well as to the abuse of their bodies. He also pleaded guilty to kidnapping and abusing Sarah for 4 days. As a result, Matthew Hoffman was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sarah faced many challenges but remained strong and played a key role in the investigation, receiving praise from the police for her courage. She wanted the opportunity to speak at Matthew's sentencing to confront him directly. However, she was advised against doing so. After losing her mother and brother, she moved in with her father and stepmother. Sarah later wrote a book called Girl in the Leaves. When Sarah turned 16, her father and stepmother were charged with assaulting her. A protective order was issued, and Sarah moved in with another relative. Not much has been heard from her since then, but she is safe and well.